Chapter 625. Oh, Su Fengnian replied and turned around to leave. He said softly, "It's hard for you to see your grandfather. I buried him by the Ruoshui River." Su Beiji was stunned. In the dead of the night, the servant boy who had warmed up the steps with his buttocks was bored to death. When he heard the noise, he turned his head with a face full of disbelief. Not only did his master, who did not drink a drop of wine, not only raised his cup and drank all the wine in it, but he also seemed to be crying and smiling. He raised his head and picked up the remaining wine pot and poured it all down his throat. The middle-aged man whose hands were longer than his knees had once made the arrogant chess and sword music school's headmaster sweat profusely outside the gate of heaven of Tao Te sect. However, after such an ambitious and ruthless person left the Taoist temple for the Arctic tundra and crossed the Yellow River, there were no disturbances along the way. When he was near the upper reaches of the Yellow River, he didn't make any shocking moves like jumping across the river. He paid the boatman money and crossed the river on a raft. He was like a clay bodhisattva without any temper. It should be known that among all the martial artists in the world, Wang Xianji, he could stand shoulder to shoulder with. When she left the martial emperor's city for the first time in almost 50 years, the Liang dynasty sent thousands of cavalrymen to keep an eye on her, fearing that this old guy who liked to call himself the second in the world would cause trouble. 2 dynasties and 2 Jianghu people believed that as long as this man and Wang Xianji joined hands, they could easily kill the remaining 8 of the 10 people in the world. It was enough to show how powerful this Beimang military god with the surname Tuoba was. If one thought that as long as one was a top martial artist, he would be the kind of fledgling in Jianghu who could shock the world with a fart, even if he met Tuoba face to face, he would probably be regarded as a layman in front of a real Buddha. Everyone in Beimang knew that Tuoba didn't believe in Buddhism, but he was close to Buddhism and far away from Taoism. Especially when he assisted the empress in the same dynasty as the state preceptor immortal Qilin, they didn't even meet once in the past 20 years. It was like the vassal of the Liang dynasty, the archenemy of the Liang dynasty, was not allowed to see the other vassal. It was a calm day. Tuoba, who had been extremely valiant when he was young, walked down from the raft. His feet had barely touched the ferry when the surface of the Yellow River shook violently. It was as if there was a dragon at the bottom of the river. Frightened, the boatman tied the raft tightly and jumped ashore. He did not dare to fight for this small amount of money. The people waiting at the ferry only saw a blink of an eye before they realized that the previously living middle-aged man had disappeared without a trace. In the open space, the stern bodhisattva Tuoba saw an old Taoist. His hair and beard were as white as snow, and his Taoist robe fluttered in the absence of wind. He was truly like an immortal, possessing a rare immortal aura. Tuoba said calmly, "Imperial tutor, do you know that those who block me will die?" The old Taoist waved his horsetail whisk and smiled, "I am the imperial preceptor, the imperial preceptor is not me. It doesn't matter if I die or not." Tuoba said with disgust, "Stop pretending." The next moment, it was as if thunder had exploded all over Tuoba's body. The originally short man had grown to 9 feet tall. His pair of ape-like long arms no longer appeared abrupt. A clay bodhisattva would be unable to protect himself when crossing the river. Tuoba crossed the river, even the gods and Buddhas couldn't stop him. It was rumored that there was a floating mountain in the Dao sect that was 6,000 feet above the ground. There were thousands of palaces on the mountain. Li Dongxin pulled up the river and flooded the Dao sect. The water gushed out from the heavenly gate and washed the jade steps. The white-robed monk floated to the ground and walked into a narrow valley that was filled with green. When he reached the end, he was suddenly enlightened. The valley didn't have the majestic buildings that people imagined. There was only a Taoist temple built against the mountain. It was a circular plaza with a Taiji diagram carved on it. The yin and yang fishes were intertwined. The entire plaza seemed to have returned to its original state and was unusually simple. There were clouds and mist rising from the yin and yang fishes, reaching straight to the sky. The white-robed monk raised his head and looked. There were dozens of giant white storks that were different from the same species spiraling upwards. It was obvious that there were Taoists riding them. Their Taoist robes were long sleeves and made them look like immortals riding cranes. These Taoists from the Dao sect were originally the wine-offering Taoists who stayed in the temple. Li Dongxin returned their greetings with the river and forced them to escape into the sky. In Li Dongxin's vision, other than the Taoists and the white storks, there was indeed a huge mountain floating in the sky. The Taoists rode on the white storks and floated up. A young Taoist floated down from the floating mountain that reached the clouds. This Taoist with a sword on his back landed at the intersection of the yin and yang fishes, guarding the pass alone. The Taoist looked to be about 27 or 28 years old. He was extremely masculine and had a feminine appearance. Li Dongxin took a glance and sneered, as expected of the Qilin spiritual master who has reached the sage realm. Your skills are really impressive. You even figured out the secret technique of the I Chi turning 3 pure ones. Why, do you want me to pluck out the 9 worms and cut off the 3 corpses? But what about the remaining 2 fake immortals? Aren't they going out to welcome the guests together? That was too petty of him. Now that the 3 sects have each produced a sage, let's not talk about my master. Even the Confucian sage Chao Chongqing is a distinguished person who dares to treat the palace as a toilet. You, the Beimang imperial advisor who hides your strength, is nothing compared to him. The seemingly young Taoist smiled warmly and said, Li Dongxin, who has no Zen to speak of, also wants to be angry? I won't argue with you. I'll just stand here and wait. The Dragon Tree monk has cultivated the unmovable Zen through the Diamond Sutra. Since you insist on being fearful, I will not move today and let you do as you please. Li Dongxin simply responded with an "oh." He did not say anything else and stretched out his arms towards the direction of the hovering mountain. His white kasaya suddenly stuck to his tall and sturdy body. Then, his feet sank and the ground was above his knees. The white-robed monk pulled down the entire hovering mountain. It suddenly pressed down on the young Taoist's head. Li Dongxin entered the heavenly gate alone and left the heavenly gate alone. He swept past nearly 1,000 steps and squatted on the ground to carry his master who was covered in gold. The few disciples of the Dao sect's imperial advisor did not dare to stop him. The old monk was already on the verge of death. The old monk smiled and asked, "You won the fight?" The white-robed monk nodded. "Disciple, is there a saying at the foot of the mountain that deep love does not live long? I don't know if it was right or wrong for me to agree to marry you back then. This is not a principle that a monk should say. Principles are not separated from the secular world. If it is reasonable, then it is reasonable. The Dharma is not necessarily the sentences in the Buddhist scriptures, and the sentences in the Buddhist scriptures are not necessarily the Dharma. East and west, north and south. Especially your daughter, she is very reasonable. If I could understand, would willingly give her candied fruits. If I did not understand then, would not give it to her in a hurry. Sometimes, I slowly thought it through and remembered to give her some food. My daughter even threw a tantrum and did not want it. Master, can you stop talking? You should go back to the temple and tell my daughter about these things. It's too late. Li Dongxin's figure once again flashed across the yellow river's surface like a white rainbow. It is difficult to understand the Dharma. There are many eminent monks in our 2 Zen temples who know more than your master. Many of them can even deal with the imperial court and the authorities. They are all carefree people. Master is really squatting in the latrine pit and not taking a shit. Sigh, I have been worried all these years. Fortunately, monks have shaved off 3,000 strands of worry. They are of the same generation as you, but they are less human than you. Since they have not become Buddhas, they are still human. You can't say that. It will hurt our friendship. Master, I am praising you. I know. I am just afraid that you will say it in front of others. You and I will not be able to get away with it. Master, it is rare for you to be so muddle-headed. Both North and South learned from you. Actually, to be honest, I am not afraid of annihilating Buddhism. I am not afraid of how many temples and scriptures are burned, or how many monks are chased away. What I am afraid of is that the Buddha's heart and Dharma will not last forever. Every Zen is still at Hinayana. Whether or not Hinayana can enter Mahayana in the future, I will not be able to see it. Master, I do not wish to see that day. He, as the master of North and South's master, I do not wish to see that day either. However, I can only say this to you. After saying this, the monk of the dragon tree, who was covered in dried gold, chanted Ba once before becoming silent. The white-robed monk, Li Dongxin, stopped. He tore off a section of his kasaya and tied it around his master. He closed his eyes and put his palms together before heading up to the 9 heavens. On this day, hundreds of Taoists and close to 10,000 devotees of the Tao Virtue sect looked up at the boundless Buddha's light. They all heard the chanting of the Diamond Sutra descending from the sky. On this day, thousands of devotees became devout Buddhists. Chapter 626. A rare guest visited the small village of Jianghu Mountain. As the owner, a man in white stood at the entrance of the village. When he saw the hunchbacked old man coming down from the carriage, he showed a rare smile of understanding. He quickly walked forward and respectfully called out, "Foster father." The old man nodded and looked around. He clicked his tongue and said, "I just found out that there is such a beautiful place on the border of Biyao." If the old man's eldest son was here, he would definitely refute him by saying, "What beautiful scenery. There isn't even half a stream. What kind of pretense is that?" In the eyes of outsiders, such a pair of tepid adopted father and son really couldn't be associated with the title of the Prince of Northern Liang and the Little Butcher. Those old people in the streets and alleys always mistakenly thought that once these two kings of hell met, they would always eat human flesh and drink human blood, shouting that they would kill tens of thousands of people the next day and so on. However, at this time, Su Xiao only asked about whether the supply of meat and vegetables in the manor was troublesome or not, and how to avoid the heat in the hot summer. Qin Jibao also smiled and answered one by one. This was the first time Su Xiao set foot in the small village. The servants in the village were used to living a short, stable, and comfortable life under the protection of Qin Jibao. Few people recognized Su Xiao's identity. Fortunately, Su Xiao was not the kind of person who liked to play with his identity. He did not care about the poor eyesight of the servants in the village. If it were a snobbish person like Li Gongda, the head of the new Baliang Taoism, he would definitely want to cut out the eyes of the servants and feed them to the dogs. However, Qin Jibao was indifferent and did not even deliberately say a word. From the moment he entered the village and sat down in the shade of a willow tree, he did not reveal Su Xiao's identity. Outside the village, there were no tall trees or high walls. Under the willow trees, the father and son could see the endless yellow sand. A well-behaved maidservant brought in a basin of iced lychee. The ice cubes were all hammered down from the ice house. Lychee was a rare fruit that was said to only grow in the miasma of southern Xinjiang. Every once in a while, it would be sent to the village. However, Qin Jibao rarely tasted it, so he distributed it to the servants. Imperceptibly, the young girls in the village had raised their small mouths to be extremely crafty. Their vision and speech were also arrogant. Occasionally, they would go out to the village to play, take a stroll in the spring, or enjoy the lanterns. Not to mention the daughters of small families in the nearby provinces and counties, even the daughters of noble families would feel ashamed of their inferiority when they bumped into these maidservants, who were supposed to have a lowly status. It was not as if the old steward of the village had never mentioned to the general that he had to worry about the trifles of the village. However, his good-natured master dismissed it with a laugh every time, so the matter was left unsettled. When the old steward privately chatted with the young men and girls in the village, he would never forget to remind them that their general was extremely strict in his management of the army. They had good fortune. If they had gone to the Baliang army, they would have been skinned alive a long time ago. They had never seen the general angry, especially the young girls, who would always laugh and say that they were willing to be beaten to death by the general. The old steward, who had retired from the Baliang army, felt helpless, but at the same time, he was gratified and happy. After lecturing them with a stern face, he turned around and smiled brightly, thinking that it was the great fortune of the servants. Su Xiao picked up a lychee, peeled it, and put it in his mouth. He asked the delicate servant girl who was unwilling to leave immediately, "Young girl, how old are you?" The servant girl had been peeking at the general with all her might, but she was startled by the old man's question. The village rarely had guests, and she could not guess the identity of this old man. She could not guess whether he was a current general in the Biyao army or a provincial official. She only felt that he looked amiable and amiable. Besides, no matter how high the official's hat was, he would not dare to behave atrociously in the village under the general's name. She did not have any stage fright and quickly smiled and said, in response to uncle's question, "After the new year, I will be 16. Su Xiao swallowed the lychee and did not spit out the seed. He laughed loudly and said, "Then do you have a sweetheart? If you do, have your General Chen be the matchmaker." The beautiful girl with an oval face was shy. She deliberately put on some light rouge and face powder and said shyly, "No." Chen Jibao was obviously in a very good mood. For the first time, he joked, "Lu Ci, if you have a sweetheart, I will be the matchmaker for you." The young servant girl, whose heart was in the general's hands, did not know how to hide her emotions. She thought that the general was going to drive her out of the village, and her eyes suddenly became wet. She did not dare to show it in front of the guests, so she just looked like she was about to cry. Su Xiao felt that his young girl was lively, and laughed loudly. Chen Jibao shook his head and smiled. The servant girl named Lu Ci did not know how to react to the two's laughter, but she was not embarrassed. Her eyebrows relaxed, and a smile reappeared. After Su Xiao laughed, he seemed to want to test her. He picked up a plump lychee and asked, "Lu Ci, do you know what this is?" The 16-year-old girl, Lu Xiangyi, who was standing under the willow tree, smiled and replied, "Lychees." Su Xiao nodded. "I heard that a lychee without a branch changes color one day, loses its fragrance 2 days, and loses its flavor 3 days later. After 4 or 5 days, it will lose its color, fragrance, and smell. After half a year, it will be even more disgusting. It is not even comparable to the watermelons that cost a few coins a caddy in Biyao. Lizzie, this is a good name. It is ironed well. Only a scholar can think of such a good name." The servant girl, who was afraid that the guests would look down on the village, quickly retorted, "Uncle, our lychees are very fresh." Chen Jibao did not say a word. He waved his hand, and the servant girl did not dare to act rashly. She obediently retreated, but there was still some childish indignation on her face. Chen Jibao waited for her to leave before he slowly said, "Back in the day, foster father single-handedly built the Southern Courier Road. Apart from the transportation of red sandalwood, yellow flower, and other tributes, such as lychees and exotic delicacies, it is still considered smooth and unimpeded. The rest is not worth mentioning. If it were not for Zhang Julu personally supervising the fire of peace, the fire of beacon would have been almost completely abandoned." Su Xiao glanced at the fresh lychees in the ice tray and smiled. Being prepared for danger in times of peace is as difficult as being content with what you have. Chen Jibao suddenly said, "Foster father, this year on New Year's Eve, do you want to come to this little village with His Royal Highness for a New Year's Eve dinner? I will personally cook a few dishes that I specialize in." Su Xiao mischievously said, "In the end, you just want Wei Xiong to eat your dishes, right?" Chen Jibao smiled helplessly. The sunset in Biyao was 3 hours later than in the south, but no matter how late it would still set. Father and son gazed at the sunset in the west. Su Xiao was touched by the scene and said softly, "It has been hard on you these past few years." Chen Jibao was about to speak when Su Xiao smiled and asked, "How was it that you fought 2 rounds in a row with the founder of the chess and sword music school and the martial prodigy Hong Jingyan?" Chen Jibao smiled and said, "Although the outside world says it is amazing, in reality, I did not fight to the death with them, so I did not have the opportunity to use that stick of plum wine." The famous general in white frowned and said, "That Hong Jingyan is a character. That battle with me was just a method for him to build up his reputation. In the future, when he enters the army from the Jianghu, he is destined to be a great enemy of Biyao." Su Xiao rubbed his hands and said with emotion, "Beimang is full of talents." It was inevitable that one would have supporters in the army when leading an army to war. However, Chen Jibao had never heard of any cliques in Beiyang's political circle. Whether it was Li Gongda, an old glutton in the officialdom who took advantage of every opportunity, or Yan Jieshi, the governor of Biyao, who had a high reputation but later betrayed Biyao, or even many scholars and refined scholars, Chen Jibao ignored them all. When he left the army and came to the quiet and secluded village, he closed the door and refused to see anyone, let alone take the initiative to make friends with anyone. It could be said that not a single flaw could be found in Chen Jibao, the adopted son of a butcher. In private, he was even more indifferent and had no desires. Such a person with a perfect personality was worthy of heartfelt admiration, but also made some people feel even more fearful. Chen Jibao looked at the sky and whispered, "Foster father, the weather is cold." Su Xiao nodded and stood up. He shook his head and said, "I'm really old." Chen Jibao had welcomed Su Xiao at the entrance of the village and even walked him out of the village. When Su Xiao sat in the carriage, the man in white still stood there and did not leave for a long time. After General Gu Jiantang took charge of the border, the entire army at the border suddenly became solemn. However, there were wild rumors in the border army that the general, who was known for his meticulous management of the army, had taken in a sloppy person as his adopted son. In the Liang dynasty, Gu Jiantang, who had destroyed 2 countries, had a military merit that was second only to the infamous king of Biyao. Furthermore, General Gu's reputation did not lose out to any famous scholar. He treated his soldiers like his own children and treated them with respect. He used the army like a god. Inside and outside of the court, there were many good things to say about him. Even Gu Jiantang's many wives and concubines, who were as beautiful as fairies, became a fairy tale. His eldest son, Gu Donghai, and his second son, Gu Shishan, both joined the army at a young age, and did not bring disgrace to the great General Gu's reputation. Their military exploits were outstanding, and their achievements far surpassed those of their peers. What was not easy was that they drew a clear line with the capital's playboys. They did not interact with each other and never once drank wine together. Compared to the king of Biyao, this general only had a disadvantage in terms of age. In the future, his advantage would also be age. How could he let a slut surnamed Yuan into his family? This puzzled many people. Yuan Tingshan, who was used to being a stray dog and a rat crossing the street, believed more than anyone else that he would have a meteoric rise. Therefore, even though he had become the half-adopted son of Gu Jiantang, the head of the world's machete men, he only felt that it was natural and had no awareness that he should be extremely lucky. He had almost lost his life in the Baogua temple in Gangnam-do. Under the sword chi of the young martial granduncle, he fled to the northern region in one breath. Although he still had some lingering fear when he thought about it, he often woke up from nightmares and was so scared that he was covered in cold sweat as if he had fallen into a water tank. He held the knife that was used as a pillow and was about to kill someone. However, this fear not only did not make this low-ranking foreign minister of Mount Hui discouraged, but he also became more and more desperate to practice martial arts. After receiving the secret manuals from the old immortals in Longhu Mountain, his realm skyrocketed. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had traveled 1,000 miles a day. Chapter 627. He recklessly went to challenge Gu Jiantang to a duel. After killing 80 people, he was captured by the hundreds of elite soldiers under the Grand General's command. However, it was a blessing in disguise. Gu Jiantang agreed to spar with him on the training field. The Grand General was barehanded, while Yuan Tingshan used his saber. In the end, the Grand General was holding the saber with only 2 fingers. Yuan Tingshan exerted all of his strength, but was still unable to pull the saber out from between his fingers. He was even kicked in the stomach by Gu Jiantang. He was treated like a dog that only knew how to bark and not bite and was thrown out of the camp. Unexpectedly, after 10 days, Yuan Tingshan, who had been on the verge of death, once again charged into the camp. This time, Gu Jiantang did not personally make a move. He only let his second son, Gu Shishan, and Yuan Tingshan both fight barehanded. As a result, Gu Shishan was almost strangled to death by Yuan Tingshan, who did not know how to control his strength. Gu Donghai took off his saber and picked up 2 ordinary standard sabers from the weapon rack before walking into the training field. He kept one for himself and threw the other to Yuan Tingshan. The 2 of them fought fiercely for more than 100 rounds. One of Yuan Tingshan's arms was almost chopped off. He grinned and said that he admitted defeat. After the battle, he did not forget to shake his arm and take away the military saber that was very good for him. A month later, Yuan Tingshan began to charge into the camp for the third time. This time, he received the nickname of Mangy Dog. This time, Yuan Tingshan slashed Gu Donghai's body more than 10 times. Fortunately, he did not kill him this time. He only caused the Grand General's eldest son to be seriously injured but not fatal. Yuan Tingshan, who was possessed by the devil, pointed the tip of his saber at the Grand General sitting on the high platform and shouted, "Old man Gu, if you have the ability, chop me to death today. Otherwise, sooner or later, I will replace you." From then on, the mangy dog that was not chopped to death by the Grand General became a well-known mad dog at the border. Later on, this vicious and unkillable young mad dog caught the eye of the Grand General's youngest daughter for no reason. It was obvious that Yuan Tingshan was not only an adopted son, but also half a son-in-law of the Gu family. Currently, Yuan Tingshan didn't have any real military power. He was only a secondary class 6th rank official. In the past year, he had relied on the banner of the great general to recruit over 100 stragglers from the Jianghu. For the past half a year, he had been provoking the sects at the border. He had a domineering attitude of, "Those who submit to me will prosper, and those who resist me will perish." Great General Gu didn't pay any attention to this. Almost all the second and third class sects at the border had been harassed by Yuan Tingshan. Among them, several unyielding and rigid sects were directly slaughtered by Yuan Tingshan. Occasionally, he would leave behind some women and children. Mad dog Yuan Tingshan killed people without batting an eyelid. He didn't do anything despicable like kidnapping women and occupying women. This time, Yuan Tingshan once again wiped out a small sect of 100 that didn't know when to advance or retreat. Just like before, he didn't leave even a chicken or a dog alive. During this time, there was a valiant henchman who couldn't hold back his thirst. When he saw a beautiful woman, he took off his pants and pressed her on the table. Just as he wanted to have sex with her, he was seen by Yuan Tingshan. With a single slash, he ended the lives of both the unlucky man and the innocent woman. There was a woman who secretly followed Yuan Tingshan through the Jianghu in high spirits. When they rode back to the military town, she turned around to look at the playful man lying on the back of the horse. She asked softly, "You should have just killed that pervert. Why did you kill that woman as well?" Yuan Tingshan said coldly, "The woman's chastity is gone. Living is just a torture." The woman said softly, "Maybe she's actually willing to live?" Yuan Tingshan said unhappily, "That's none of my business." The woman still wanted to say something, but Yuan Tingshan said impatiently, "Don't nag me. You haven't even married into my family, and you already think you're my wife?" The woman who was born in the dynasty was being reprimanded by a man who was just a brute not long ago. She actually didn't get angry and only stuck out her tongue. Yuan Tingshan was unsettled. He sat up straight and said with a smile, "Oh right, where did you talk about the soldier training records written by your father?" Gu Beihu, who was the youngest daughter of General Gu Jiantang, became interested and said, "We're about to talk about the 19 matters of marching." Yuan Tingshan rolled his eyes and said, "Marching? I know that too. Isn't the essence of it all about speed? Look at my subordinates. They ride fast, attack fast, kill fast, and steal even faster. Of course, when they see that the situation is not right, they're the fastest to escape." Gu Beihu, who was famous in the capital for being unruly and difficult to please, was abnormally docile and obedient in front of Yuan Tingshan. She covered her mouth and laughed, then said seriously, "Marching isn't that simple. Not only is my father familiar with the books of the military, he also studied the vagrant bandits of the spring and autumn period who were good at marching. My father told me that although these bandits weren't part of the general trend, their specialty was in the word flow. They were good at marching, and each camp had thousands or tens of thousands of troops. They also had the old and the weak in the middle and the elite in the outside. When they moved, they had scouts scouting from afar. When they stopped, they had horses and supplies. Furthermore, my father greatly admired Lu Xingxiang's 1,000 cavalry entering Luzhou on a snowy night, as well as Chu Lushan's lone army entering Shu. He often compared these victories to maps and records. Let's not talk about other things. Just the maps and records alone. Generally, in the military, maps and records are handled by a subordinate of the Ministry of War. Before a battle, they would go to the bureau to ask for them. However, in the military, before every border, there would always be a detailed map on his desk. During the Spring and Autumn War, my father personally destroyed 2 countries. When he entered the imperial palace, the first thing he took was not those beautiful concubines or gold treasures, but the map of the country. From this, he could tell how many cities there were in a country, and how much taxes there were. She imitated the tone of a general and smiled like an old man. All the details of a country are in my hands. Gu Beihu spoke with great interest, but Yuan Tingshan listened until he was drowsy. She had originally wanted to talk about the 19 matters of marching in detail, but seeing that the man who was full of admiration had no desire to listen, she could only resentfully give up. Yuan Tingshan suddenly said, "Hey, it's a flat land." Gu Beihu glared at Yuan Tingshan, who spoke without thinking, and then quickly lowered her head to look at her flat chest. She felt wronged. She did not expect Yuan Tingshan to say something like the sun rising from the west. "I've thought about it. Your chest is a bit small, but you're still a good wife. As long as you're not jealous, marrying you as a mistress in the future is actually not bad." Gu Beihu's spirits were instantly high. Unfortunately, Yuan Tingshan poured a bucket of cold water on her head. "I'll say the ugly words first. In the future, I'll definitely take a beauty as a concubine. If a man doesn't lack money, it's not right to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. It's really not right. I've lived in vain." Gu Beihu whispered, "Don't even think about it. If you dare take a slut home, I'll beat one to death. If 2 come, I'll poison a pair. If 3 come, I'll go back to my parents' home and tell my father." Yuan Tingshan held his belly and laughed. Gu Beihu saw that he was happy, so she was also happy. Her mother seemed to have said that this was a woman's love. Yuan Tingshan lowered his head and reached out to touch the plain scabbard of the standard saber. He raised his head and said, "My parents died in the turmoil of war, and I don't even know where they are buried. I only have one master in my entire life. Although his martial arts were sloppy, he treated me well. A master for a day is a father for life. At least I know where the old man's grave is. If you want to marry me, you can go to the grave with me and kowtow a few times. That old man was addicted to wine, so when you go there, bring some good wine." Gu Beihu, do you think that the dignified daughter of a great general is degrading herself by doing this kind of thing? The woman bit her lips and shook her head. Yuan Tingshan grinned. He squeezed the horse's belly and approached her. His calloused hand rubbed her black hair. Governor Li Gongda, who was originally the second in command of a province, had become the second in command of the entire northern Liang Path in name. As an official, he had already reached a high level of not showing his emotions on his face. However, after he sent a letter home to a second-rank official, he was already grinning from ear to ear. He caught all the servants in the mansion and rewarded them with silver. The steward who carried the silver behind him had thin arms and legs to begin with, so his arms were almost broken from exhaustion. Master Li's ability to scrape the land was second to none in the Liang dynasty. Giving out money? It was rare. The administrator wandered slowly in the garden of the mansion. The stout old man, who usually complained that he was tired after walking a few more steps, had probably walked dozens of miles today, but he was still in high spirits. Without turning his head, he smiled at the steward and said, "Lin Wang, this time I've gained face. My precious son is so promising." Not to mention that he became a crossbowman, 1 in 10,000, this time he went to northern Mang and killed countless northern barbarians. This kind of military merit can't be found even in the whole of northern Liang, let alone in Feng province. What do you think of my son Hanlin? Is he a dragon among men? The old steward named Lin Wang didn't dare to say no. He thought that his master had said this dozens of times, but he still had to flatter him with a righteous tone. "Yes, yes, yes. Master, you're right. If the young master is not a dragon among men, no one in Biyao can be worthy of this title. However, the old steward, who was used to seeing the young master cause trouble in Feng province, was really shocked. The master's ancestral grave was really smoking. The young master, who was not good at literature but good at martial arts, had become outstanding in less than 2 years after entering the Biyao army. Li Gongda frowned and said, "You're not being particular." "Of course, besides the 2 princes, it's my son's turn." Lin Wang quickly smiled and said, "Yes, yes, yes." Chapter 628. In Biyao, it was said that the administrator had 3 meetings and 3 meetings. The 3rd meeting was that he would steer according to the wind, be greedy for money, and be aroused by women. The 3rd meeting was that he would not act until he saw the hair, would not shed tears until he saw the coffin, and would not kneel until he saw Prince Liang. The knowledge in this matter was not great, but it was not small either. In any case, the benevolent had their own views, and the wise had their own views. There were many snobbish people in the northern Liang officialdom who considered themselves to be the disciples and grand disciples of Lord Li, the official. When the servant girls heard that the ruthless young master was about to return home with illustrious military achievements, they were not only skeptical, but also fearful of the impending disaster. Since Li Gongda refused to kneel before Prince Liang, and even dared to disregard imperial edicts several times, throwing them away as soon as he received them. It was easy to imagine how perverse this powerful border official was. Like father, like son. Before Li Hanlin joined the army, as Li Gongda's son and the crown prince's friend, he was worthy of his reputation as a dandy. If it weren't for the 2 golden tokens that allowed him to avoid death, he would have been dragged out and hacked to pieces a long time ago. "Master, master, 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 master has ridden into the city." A gatekeeper hurriedly ran into the garden, shouting. Coincidentally, he fell flat on his face, which made his loyalty even more commendable. The chief steward behind the administrator saw this and curled his lips in disdain. Li Gongda's old face was full of smiles. He coughed a few times, and ordered the chief steward, Lin Wang, "Go and inform the mistress." 4 riders entered the city, and after entering the city, they reined in their horses and moved slowly. They were led by Li Hanlin, followed by Lu Do, Li Shiyue, and an ordinary crossbowman named Feng Hudu. He had the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. He looked fierce, but his temperament was the most gentle of the 4. Before the 4 riders entered the city, they first went to Ma Zhenjai, who had died in the battle at the Ladder Mountain. They personally delivered the compensation to his family. Ma Zhenjai was not the only one. Almost 80 to 90% of the 50 men who had died in Beimang had died. The 4 of them went to visit the homes of the chiefs and brothers who had died in the battle. There was still half a day of vacation left. They had agreed to stay at Li Hanlin's place for a few days, but Li October said that the main event was still to go to his place to eat and drink. He would not stop until he had gained a few pounds of autumn fat. His father was once a crossbowman of Biyao and had just been promoted to sergeant. He had always thought that Li Hanlin was just a disciple from an ordinary family. When October Li saw the intimidating administrator's mansion, and saw the old man, who was solemnly dressed in the second-rank civil official's make-up uniform, holding the new chief's hand and weeping on the street in spite of his official prestige, October Li was somewhat stunned. A woman wearing the title of a lady was crying as she hugged Li Hanlin. Her heart ached terribly. Feng Hudu was slow to realize that a servant had already taken his horse away after he dismounted. He then nudged Li October with his elbow and asked carefully, "October, the chief's father is also an official. Why, is he older than your father?" Li October laughed and scolded softly, "You fool, this is the chief administrator of Biyao, second rank. Do you think he's older or not? My father is far from it. Motherf asterisk cur, the chief is not honest. At first, I was wondering why the chief had the same name as Li Hanlin, the villain of Fengzhou. It turns out that they are the same person. Motherf asterisk cur, fortunately, I originally planned to introduce my sister to Lu Do. If it were our chief, my sister would be scared half to death." In addition to the trusted aides of the administrator, there was also an extremely beautiful woman standing next to Li Gongda. She looked somewhat similar to Li Hanlin, but perhaps because her eyes were naturally cold, they made her, who had a pair of charming eyes, seem a little unapproachable. When she saw her younger brother, who had always made her worry since he was a child, no matter how cold her temperament was, she quietly cried and pinched Li Hanlin hard with her eyes red. Beiliang women were mostly heroic, but there were also a few who were outstandingly beautiful. Yan Dongwu was known for his talent in Beiliang, and Li Hanlin's sister, Li Fuzhen, purely used her beauty to move people's hearts. Su Fengnian, as the heir and close friends with Li Hanlin and Yan Qiji, could be said to be in a favorable position. Unfortunately, he had always been at odds with Yan Dongwu. As for Li Fuzhen, who had nothing special other than her beauty, it was strange to say that she actually looked down on Su Fengnian from the bottom of her heart more than Yan Dongwu. The former would even say a few harsh words to the heir when he was angry, but Li Fuzhen refused to even look at him. 2 years ago, she had been possessed and fell in love at first sight with a poor scholar. At that time, Li Hanlin was secretly resentful of the heir's lack of loyalty and went out to travel without telling her. Chapter 629. Li Hanlin originally wanted to secretly kill that bastard who dared to steal his sister from the heir, but he could not do anything about his sister being stubborn and refusing to eat. She said that if he died, she would die. She wanted to be a pair of lovebirds. After much persuasion, he finally persuaded her. Li Hanlin did not dare to kill that fellow and secretly made things difficult for him. God knew that the more the scholar was defeated, the braver he became. Even Li Gongda, who was still the provincial governor of Feng province at the time, had a whole new level of respect for him. He privately weighed the pros and cons with his wife and thought that it would be better to let him go than to block him. It was better to treat him like raising a dog to guard the door outside. After a few operations, he first raised the scholar's family rank, and then had him become a minor official. When Li Gongda became the administrator, his chickens and dogs rose to the heavens. The scholar also went from being a minor official to an official. Officials and officials, the difference of one word was like the difference between heaven and earth. Li Gongda, who was still the provincial governor of Feng province at the time, had a whole new level of respect for him. He privately weighed the pros and cons with his wife and thought that it would be better to let him go than to block him. He thought of it as raising a dog to guard the door outside. After a few operations, he first raised the scholar's family rank, and then had him become a minor official. When Li Gongda became the administrator, his chickens and dogs rose to the heavens. The scholar also went from being a minor official to an official. Officials and officials, the difference of one word was like heaven and earth. Later on, when Su Fengnian returned from his travels, he left Liangzhou on his white horse. Since then, he no longer had any contact with this woman, who did not like men's appearance and only liked talent and learning. She was happy that she did not see, her heart did not feel troubled. She wished that the heir would never return to the Li mansion for the rest of his life. The crossbowman who had gone through fire and water with him strode into the mansion. Li October and the other two did not flinch. Li Gongda, who had long cultivated a pair of discerning eyes, was very good at reading people. Seeing them, not only was he not angry, he was very gratified. In the end, the military could train people. These brothers that his son had made friends with would be the backbone of Beiliang in the future. Li Hanlin greeted the elders of the mansion. After bathing and changing his clothes, he ate fiercely with Lu Do and the other two. When his wife saw that her son, who liked to pick fat and thin, did not leave a single grain of rice behind and finished 3 big bowls of white rice, she felt a wave of sadness. She sat next to her son and looked at him carefully. No matter how much she looked, she could not get enough of him. She muttered to herself, "You've become tanned and have lost a lot of weight. You have to stay for a few more days. If the army urges you, your father won't dare to plead with the king of Beiliang. Mother will go." Except for the mute Lu Do, Li Hanlin put many dishes into Li October and Fong Huda's chopsticks. He made a funny face and joked, "Mother, military law is like a mountain. Don't blindly join in the fun. A loving mother makes a useless son, do you know that?" His wife glared at him and said, "How can a loving mother give birth to a useless son? Who dares to call my son a useless son?" Mother will slap him in the face. The administrator stroked his beard and laughed. That's reasonable, that's reasonable. After the sumptuous banquet, Li Gongda and his wife were tactful. Although they had 1,000 things to say in their hearts, they still restrained themselves from disturbing the young people. In a pavilion with a raised eave, Fang Hudu was led to turn here and there under the guidance of others. When he came back, he clicked his tongue in wonder and said, Chief Biyao, even the outhouse in your house is spacious and luxurious. You have to find me a big bed to sleep on so that I can tell the villagers when I go home. Look at you. Li October picked up a grape and threw it at him. Fang Huda smiled and held it in his mouth. Li October threw it again, but it was like walking a dog. Fang Huda didn't care and played with it happily. Lu Do cursed with a calm voice, you two idiots. Li Fujian sat quietly and virtuously to the side, watching with her mouth agape. Of course, she didn't know that in Beimang, Fang Hudu had blocked a sharp knife that was comparable to Bailiang's knife. In a moment of desperation, Li October had used her hand to deflect several arrows for Fang Hudu. One of the arrows had pierced his palm. Li Fujian did not know what kind of price the crossbowmen had paid as the vanguard scouts traveled north and uprooted the beacons one after another. Li Hanlin suddenly turned to look at Li Fujian and asked, Sister, do you still like that poor scholar? Li Fujian's expression was somewhat unnatural. Li Hanlin didn't want to embarrass his sister and smiled sincerely, Sister, as long as you don't regret it. Li Fujian, who felt very unfamiliar, didn't know how to respond. Li Hanlin looked out of the pavilion. I didn't have the right to say anything before, but now it's a bit better. That scholar is very scheming. 2 years ago, I thought so, and now it's even more so. After all, I'm a bad person myself, and I'm always very good at judging bad people. But since you insist on liking him, I can't do anything more. But if you miss out on Brother Feng, Sister, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Li Fujian slowly lowered her head. 2 slender fingers twirled the corner of her skirt and asked, because he might become king of Bailiang? Li Hanlin suddenly laughed and said, Pretend I didn't say anything. Li Fujian looked at her brother who was going to arm wrestle with Fang Hutu and felt very lost. She said goodbye and left the pavilion. Li Gongda came to a place far away from the pavilion and stood very far away. Lu Do kicked Li Hanlin, who was busy competing with Fang Hutu. Li Hanlin jogged to his father and said with a laugh, Father, what's the matter? Could it be that his mother is controlling him too tightly, and he wants money from me, her son, to drink wine with his colleagues? How much do you want? Don't even think about a few thousand taels. I don't even have 100 taels left in my pocket. Father, how are you going to spend it? Li Gongda cursed the brat and slowly walked away. Li Hanlin hesitated for a moment and waved his hand at Lu Do and the other 2. He ran to catch up and put his arm around his father's shoulder. He walked with this old man who had been scolded countless times in Bailiang but was still the most indomitable and heroic man in Li Hanlin's heart. However, he made a gesture of raising his head and raising his cup to drink wine. He smiled, unable to change his nature, and said with a smile, Father, I've earned some money. It's not much, but I have to show my filial piety to you. How about the 2 of us go drink a few caddies of green ants? On this day, in an elegant little restaurant not far from the Li family's mansion in the city, the administrator and his son, who was a crossbowman and the chief of the crossbowmen, spent only a few dozen taels of silver, including wine and meat. In those years, this son often stole thousands of taels of silver from places that the old man deliberately hid. He spent a lot of money in Liangzhou or Lingzhou, but Li Gongda didn't feel any heartache. Even earlier, in order to get a bigger official's hat, he used chests and chests of gold and silver. Li Gongda didn't feel any heartache. On this day, he only spent a few dozen taels of silver, but the old man's heart was already pained. Chapter 630. Song Yujing was a middle to upper ranked hunter. Although he was only 25 years old, he had been lying dormant in the big net woven by Li Mibi for 12 years. He had never made a mistake, so he was able to keep an eye on Su Beiji, who was at the top of Zhu Yi's list. Beimang's territory was vast, but there were only a few hundred hunters and butterfly hunters. If everyone had to keep an eye on him one by one, it would be difficult to make ends meet. It was enough to see how important Su Beiji was to shadow Prime Minister Li Mibi. Song Yujing had kept an eye on this concubine-born son of the Su family for 6 years. He was probably the person in the world who was most familiar with Su Beiji's habits. After Su Beiji reached the age of 20, he often went out for sightseeing. This time, Song Yujing did not feel anything unusual when he went out with his attendant Wang Mingxi. However, when the shocking news came from Ruoshui Hut, which was codenamed 6, Song Yujing felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan, had been beheaded and decapitated. The head of Beimang's most powerful official was still missing. His master, Li Mibi, who had been an official with Su Huainan for many years, had personally rushed to the source of Ruoshui and was staying in the hut. Song Yujing, as the core person who controlled the secrets of the Beimang dynasty, knew very well that Li Mibi had a good relationship with the king of the northern courtyard, who was a friend of a gentleman. Therefore, in name, he seemed to be closely monitoring the hut, but he only sent out Zhu Yi's top assassin, Yujing, rather than other people who were good at finding clues. Yujing was good at killing people, and naturally was also good at killing people of the same trade. In reality, he was there to protect Su Huainan from being hit when he was down by the imperial clan. His cavalry force was also under the command of Su Huainan's former subordinates. It could be said that Su Huainan's life was quite comfortable after his retirement. With Li Mibi personally watching over him, there was no one else in the palace who could take Su Huainan's life. Song Yujing had always thought that the only person in the world who could take Su Huainan's life was the empress, but Zhu Yi had always been the knife in her sleeve to eliminate dissidents. If it wasn't Zhu Yi, then who could it be? Song Yujing couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he racked his brains, and he didn't dare to think too deeply about it. Along with the enormous secret, there were also several men and women who were not inferior to him in their evaluations. There were 3 men and 2 women. Song Yujing was temporarily granted a talisman to mobilize all of the spider web forces in the Aquarius and Golden Toad prefectures. In addition, he also had the military authority of 1,200 cavalry. Song Yujing did not have the excitement of holding great power in his hands. He only trembled with fear. Su Huainan's death would affect the whole situation. The collapse of this Beimang's mainstay was destined to stir up the imperial court. In the past, the Su family had always been supported by Su Huainan. Most of the descendants were not presentable. Only Su Beiji, who had not revealed himself to this day, was the key figure who had the hope of supporting the family. Whether to capture or invite, the master had not clearly stated in the letter. Song Yujing himself had to grasp the severity of his strength. However, Song Yujing soon felt that this mission was tricky. Other than the page boy Wang Mingxi, Su Beiji, and that scholar with an unfamiliar face had unexpectedly disappeared into thin air. Song Yujing immediately cast a large net to catch the fish. Most of the men were sent to the southern part of Golden Toad Prefecture to search for or intercept them. If the page boy had not continued south instead of turning north, Song Yujing would have been able to save himself a lot of trouble and worry. He only left one person to catch the butterfly girl to follow the page boy. The page boy, who had become a chess piece, went from Aquarius Prefecture to the frontier fortress of Golden Toad Prefecture. He then walked horizontally for several hundred li. In the end, he actually went north. After a short pause, he continued south. After walking for a full 10 days, he brought out an inexplicably large circle. During this period, Song Yujing followed the page boy's strange movements and did not dare to lower his guard. He repeatedly established and overturned his own conjectures and changed his orders several times. Not only him, but almost all of the men were exhausted. Occasionally, they met each other, but there was no complaint on their faces. Song Yujing also knew that these fellows who ate people without spitting out the bones would inevitably have countless unspoken criticisms. Among them, there was no lack of people who proposed to kill the page boy directly. Song Yujing ridiculed them in his heart and did not accept the proposal. Before the truth surfaced, Song Yujing did not wish to be on bad terms with Su Beiji. A centipede dies but never falls down. Even if the big tree that was the Su family fell, it would not be something that could happen in 1 or 2 years. Especially after Su Huainan's sudden death, Her Majesty, whose relationship with Su Huainan was shrouded in mystery, would not have a bone in her throat. Perhaps, she would even reward and comfort the group of vermin in the Su family. Song Yujing would never have expected that Su Beiji had been following the page boy from a distance. The route was roughly the same, but they both maintained a day's worth of walking. Su Beiji put on the curly-bearded man's mask from Su Fengnian's hand. Su Fengnian also changed his mask. He no longer carried the book box on his back. Instead, he changed his traveling bag and let Su Beiji, who looked like a servant, carry it on his back. The two of them were eating in a small tavern in the Golden Toad Prefecture that day. When Su Beiji first heard that Su Beiji wanted to use the page boy as bait, although he did not refuse, he already looked down on him. However, along the way, Su Beiji saw him communicating with a red-robed demon using strange hand gestures several times in the wilderness. Only then did Su Beiji thoroughly re-evaluate this future king of Biyao who dared to go alone to Beimang. Chapter 631. The two of them sat by the window of the tavern, seemingly leisurely chatting about military secrets. Su Beiji had recently become addicted to drinking. Whenever he had the chance, he would drink a few cups. As for alcohol, whether it was good or bad, he did not abstain from it. However, every time Su Fengnian saw him drink, he looked like he was squatting in a latrine pit, unable to poop. Just looking at him made him uncomfortable. Su Beiji drank until he felt his stomach burning. He could not help but snort. Only then did he slowly say, "Guess how much money did the thatched cottage spend to find out that you killed the devil Xiaoling?" Su Fengnian laughed. "At least 100 taels of gold?" Su Beiji shook his head. Not a single copper coin was spent. The news was spread by a Yelu disciple in the capital at the brothel. It was quickly brought to the thatched cottage. Su Beiji asked again, "Guess how much money did the thatched cottage spend to confirm that you had stayed in Dunhuang for a period of time?" Su Fengnian thought for a moment. "I'll guess a few 100 taels of gold." Su Beiji laughed. "Too little. About 900 taels of gold." Su Fengnian clicked his tongue. They are really willing to spend a lot of money. Su Beiji was obviously not used to drinking, but he was bold when he drank. He drank it all in one gulp and gently tapped the cup on the greasy table. He looked out the window. Because of the skin on his face, he looked like a rough man, but his eyes were as gentle as a woman's. Fortunately, only Su Fengnian was facing him. This scholar, who did not know when he would be able to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat, sighed with emotion. Wanting to find a spy who is proficient in disguise is tantamount to finding a needle in a haystack. Grandfather and I burned the midnight oil several times to calculate your route. During those days, the old man was full of energy. This kind of hide-and-seek game was like the southern glutinous rice dumplings he ate when he was young. It was quite chewy. You may not know this, but Li Mixi wasn't the only one who created the Zhu Yan that was modeled after Liang's Xiaogo. Grandfather once helped to create the framework. Half of the credit went to Li Mixi for being able to become the Empress's most trusted minister, be known as the Shadow Prime Minister, and be the 9th Commandant of Festivals. Both of them are rare scholars in the Central Plains. When he said this, Su Beiji paused for a moment and looked at Su Fengnian. When it comes to raising soldiers, Empress Murong is undoubtedly the best in the world. Zhao clan's son isn't bad either. He's the king of Biyao. Su Fengnian cut him off with a laugh. Him? What's more, during the Spring and Autumn War, it was a contest between the military cavalry and the literati. After toppling the noble families and rich clans, the scholars had no home to return to, no tree to rely on. Naturally they would bear a grudge against Su Shao, so there's no need to mention serving this butcher. Su Beiji shook his head and said, "There are two kinds of raising soldiers, raising noble scholars and raising poor scholars. You have to know that the term scholar originally only applied to nomadic scholars. For example, those school of vertical and horizontal scholars who left their names in the annals of history because of their unhindered maneuvering, or the school of thought's lobbyists. Later on, the scholars gathered and formed powerful clans, and only then did they begin to live like princes. Now that the edifice has collapsed, most of them have to work for the rice and millet. What's more, the rise of the poor scholar class in the imperial court is irresistible. There are many things that the king of Biyao can't do, but you can. The scholars of the world were originally your tide listening pavilion's millions of koi fish. Now it's just like how the tide listening pavilion is connected to the rivers, raising koi fish mixed with wild carps. If you can pick a small number of them, you can succeed. Since ancient times, strategists have sought the protection of a wise ruler, nothing more than wanting to ride the dragon's momentum and soar to the top. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "If you tell Su Xiao this kind of great principle, he'll doze off in front of you." Su Beiji dismissed it with a laugh. In Ruoshui hut, a skinny old man dressed in luxurious Sichuan brocade rushed over from the capital's strategic location overnight. He had been sitting by the water's edge the whole time. Next to him was the beheaded Su Huainan. The old man personally checked the wound and the surroundings of the hut. He waved his hand and had his subordinates leave, leaving only a young maidservant carrying a lantern without a wick. It seemed that he didn't want anyone else to disturb him and his deceased friend. In the night, the old man stretched out his withered bamboo-like arm and stroked his frosty white sideburns with his fingers. He muttered to himself, "When we were young, we came to the chaotic Beimang together. You said that you wanted to become a famous minister who could wear sword shoes and enter the imperial court unimpeded. You even laughed at me for being narrow-minded, saying that I wasn't someone who could accomplish great things and that all I had to do was play tricks behind your back. Look, what's the situation now? I can still travel at night in brocade clothes. Even when the 8 prefects and the 12 great generals see me, they only dare to curse me behind my back and say that I'll die a horrible death without descendants. You, on the other hand, don't even have a single descendant who has the guts to attend your funeral. You thought highly of Su Beiji and taught him everything you learned. Because of our friendship, I've been hesitant to kill him. Old man Su, why don't you send me a dream? I'll let him go then. I thought that I would risk half my life to make sure that you die after her. You, how could you just leave like that? You even left so sullenly. What do you want? Repay a debt? Return it to whom? A dead person is like a lamp that goes out. I won't get to the bottom of it, so that you won't scold me down there. In this way, I'll be relieved. Don't worry. Let's not talk about Su Beiji. When the time comes, the Su family has more than 200 lives. I'll leave 1 or 2 for you. The old man, who was muttering to himself, sighed. After a long silence, he raised his arm. The blind, deaf, and mute maidservant carrying the lantern immediately bent down and placed the lightless lantern in front of the powerful old man. She then handed over a pair of delicate scissors. There were dozens of butterflies in the cage. The old man took one out. His hands trembled like an old woman doing embroidery under a lamp. He cut the butterfly in half from the middle. After you die, the prefect of peace will be the biggest butterfly in the cage. Chapter 632. Normally, Su Beiji would not be able to utter a fart after being beaten with a stick. Only after he drank, especially when he was drunk, would he be unable to control his tongue. He could say anything, and he would dare to say anything. Probably because he had too much knowledge in his stomach, every time he would not be able to speak to his heart's content or to his heart's content, he would have already fallen asleep. The Ruren mountain range ran through the east and west of the Golden Toad Prefecture, the southern foothills faced each other, the irrigation canals crisscrossed. After autumn, one's field of vision would be filled with green and yellow colors, almost no different from the southern farming region of the Liang dynasty. To the north of the Ruren Prefecture was a vast grassland. The Ruren mountain range was precipitous, forming a natural barrier. Other than those pathways formed by gaps and canyons, there was no way to travel from north to south. Beimang had set up 5 towns in the Ruren Prefecture. They built barriers along the canyons and set up guards. The 5 towns were respectively Laohuai, Roxian, Jilu, and Gaokei Wuchuan. At this moment, Su Fengnian and Su Beiji were walking on the white path of the Centipede Valley, which was under the jurisdiction of the Roxian army camp. The Ro-Xian path was divided into two main and auxiliary paths. The main path was at the bottom of the valley, wide and convenient for warhorses to gallop. The auxiliary path was built through the mountain, dark and damp. The reputation of the military town of Rochuan was overshadowed by a mountain peak, and the merchants of Centipede Path were sparse. Other than the fact that the auxiliary path was difficult to traverse like a centipede, the main reason was because they were afraid of the local tyrant, Raccoon Diwu. This man with a very strange name was the mountain master of Mount Bubang. In private, he was also known as the co-ruler of the Ruran Mountains. This was because other than the military town of Rochuan that was under his direct control, the commanding generals of the two towns of Laohuai and Wuchuan were also from Mount Bubang. As one of the top sects of the Beimang dynasty, Mount Bubang was undoubtedly the most closely associated with the imperial court. Everyone there was a soldier. When Raccoon Diwu's daughter was married to Dong Zhuo, who was the most likely candidate to become the 13th great general of the southern dynasty, Mount Bubang was pushed to the forefront of the storm. Immediately, there were people who jumped out from the tent to question whether Raccoon Diwu had the ambition of a wolf and was unwilling to submit to the imperial court. Fortunately, the empress, as usual, trusted this martial artist of the Jianghu who had helped her when she was in trouble. During the wedding of Raccoon Diwu's daughter, she even sent someone to deliver an exceptional congratulatory gift and an imperial edict to adopt her as a foster daughter. The rank of the appointed madam was even higher than that of Dong Zhuo's official rank. Unknowingly, this caused Dong Zhuo to become the laughingstock of both the northern and southern dynasties of Beimang. They ridiculed Dong Zhuo for being a general who relied on women. Su Beiji walked on the dim and shady centipede path. Although there was a simple elm fence along the path, the stone floor was slippery with water. Su Beiji, who had only learned some body-strengthening boxing techniques, was trembling with fear as he walked. Fortunately, Su Fengnian was walking on his right side, so he felt a bit more at ease. This auxiliary path between the mountain walls was more than 10 feet wide and 15 feet high, barely enough for a donkey and a mule to slowly pass through while carrying goods. The inner wall was covered with moss and the top of the wall was constantly dripping with water, making it extremely easy for running warhorses to slip. There were many gaps in the path paved with bluestone slabs, making it easy for the horses' hooves to turn. If it wasn't for the horse's superb horsemanship and the fact that the horse was familiar with the centipede path, perhaps no one would dare to show off their horsemanship here. Su Beiji, who had a new wine gourd hanging on his waist, was afraid of heights, afraid that he would be distracted and fall down, so he didn't dare to speak. For this trip to the south, they had originally followed Su Beiji's arrangement and chose a path where there were many merchants who could easily pass off fish eyes as pearls. However, Su Fengnian, who was nicknamed Persimmon by the servant, had heard a rumor in the tavern that someone was going to pick a fight with the great Grandmaster Fifth Raccoon at Mount Bubang, so he dragged Su Beiji along to join in the fun. This made Su Beiji, who was used to being cautious, feel a bit of a headache. However, this Persimmon insisted on seeing the spirit of Mount Bubang, so Su Beiji couldn't possibly leave him behind and walk on the centipede path alone. In addition, the centipede path was steep and bumpy, so along the way he had given Su Fengnian quite a bit of attitude. In the end, they were two young children from wealthy and powerful families. Su Beiji was far from seeing him as a wise master who was worthy of his devotion, and Su Fengnian also didn't think that he needed to put on airs in front of Su Beiji. Recruiting talents? My Shifu Li Shan alone is equivalent to several Su Beijis. In comparison, Su Fengnian was more willing to accept that blind chess player from the 10th Bureau of Yongzi Alley, or that poor scholar who cherished books as much as his life from the Baoguo Temple in Jiangnan. However, Su Fengnian didn't deny that Su Beiji was still somewhat immature compared to Su Huainan, an old ginger who had been floating in the imperial court for a long time. However, compared to himself, this dabbler, Su Beiji was still a notch above him. The Centipede Road was as lonely as the road to the Yellow Springs. With no one around, Su Fengnian didn't make things difficult for Su Beiji, who couldn't be said to have any martial arts skills. He personally carried the luggage. Even so, Su Beiji still had to stop and rest every few li. Perhaps he was somewhat grateful to Su Fengnian for taking the initiative to stop and rest each time to save face. Su Beiji somewhat boldly walked along the railing with a wide view. He looked at the fertile land south of the Ruan Mountains and finally opened his mouth to ask, why does His Royal Highness practice martial arts? Isn't he afraid of delaying the future military affairs of Biyao? If the descendants of the vassal kings muddle along, they will naturally not lack glory, splendor, wealth, and rank. The emperor of the Zhao family will probably be happy to see this happen. However, to maintain the special honor of being hereditary, one must always exhaust one's mind. King of Jing'an, Zhao Heng, paid with his life. Crown Prince Zhao Sun even entered the capital. Wealth and honor are found in danger. Moreover, you will be the only king with a different surname in the Liang dynasty. I think in this world, only the king of Biyao and His Royal Highness can feel the weight of this burden. I originally thought that you would be the one who looked down on the boorish men of Jianghu the most. After all, the king of Biyao personally destroyed most of the vitality of Liang Lake. Biyao Palace has countless hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Why would His Royal Highness need to personally practice martial arts? With the lure of fame and fortune, with one command, there will always be countless experts working for you. When Su Beiji wasn't drinking, most of his words were spoken in such an emphatic tone, always with a hint of questioning. Chapter 633. Su Fengnian was preoccupied with his own thoughts, so he simply ignored this successor of Su Huainan, who had already lost his family and had yet to live under someone else's roof. Su Beiji, who was ignored, was not angry. He said to himself, chivalrous people use force to suppress disorder, but the two imperial courts both have unprecedented control over their own Jianghu. Beimang's Jianghu has directly become the imperial court servants, while Liang's Jianghu also has their own watchdogs. The internal strife is fierce. I really don't understand why there is a need to personally go into this kind of Jianghu that is struggling at death's door. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed and sat down on the rotten guardrail. Su Beiji looked at him with trepidation. Su Fengnian looked at this talented person who liked to look at the situation from a strategically advantageous position. He said calmly, Su Beiji, have you seen with your own eyes 2,000 flying swords? Have you seen with your own eyes the rise of the sea with your own strength? Have you seen a wisp of sword energy destroy a city wall? Su Beiji calmly shook his head. No, I haven't. But since ancient times, everything has its vanquisher. The Sword Emperor of West Shu guarded the country's gate for the Son of Heaven, but wasn't he also crushed by your Su family's cavalry until not even his bones remained? Why wouldn't the Jianghu people who have been famous for a long time be willing to fight on the battlefield? Isn't it because they are afraid of capsizing in the gutter? Moreover, the elite armies often have similar cavalry that specifically targets the top experts. I'm guessing that your Liang's Grand Secretary Zhang Julu has spared no effort to tilt the empire's taxes to the north. He must have let Gu Jiantang support a force that can deal with Beimang's Jianghu martial force. Don't think that the chess and sword music school of Mount Bubang is very arrogant right now. Once they are driven to the battlefield to fight, they won't be able to withstand a few large-scale battles. Su Fengnian laughed. Are you mocking me? Are you saying that I'm not doing my job properly? Su Beiji lifted his wine gourd and drank a mouthful of wine. Su Fengnian did not get angry. Instead, he smiled and sighed sincerely, your opinion is exactly the same as my second sister's. However, as a crown prince, the only thing I can do before I reach the age of 20 is not proper work. You can't expect me to conceal my strength and bide my time while harboring evil intentions. I'm not afraid of you laughing at me. Even now, I don't have any direct descendants to speak of. If you think about it carefully, it seems that there are only 200 or 300 people in the Phoenix Battalion that I have some friendship with. I would have liked someone to bow to me, but during my second journey, during the Battle of the Reeds outside Xiangfan City, one of the Dongyue swordsmen in my residence cursed me as Your Highness the Crown Prince before he died. At that time, I knew that no one in the world was stupid. Su Beiji wiped the wine from the corner of his mouth and teased, so it's because you don't dare to sit on the dragon throne, not because you don't want to. Su Fengnian helplessly said, a chicken talks with a duck. Su Beiji slowly said, currently, several major events have happened. First, our dynasty's Taiping commandery has become the imperial preceptor, the prince of Zhao Kai has surfaced for the first time with a silver vase in his hand and entered the western region. The white-robed monk entered the clouds and preached the Diamond Sutra. With the support of the empress, Dao Dezong began to gather the country's strength to compile the Daoist canon. Zhang Julu began to transfer the elite cavalry of several vassal kings to the northern border. Among them, the king of Yanqi and the king of Jing and Zhao Sun spared no effort. The king of Guangling, Zhao Yi, who shares the same father and mother as the Son of Heaven, was summoned by his elder brother to the capital and reprimanded him to his face. Liang began to circulate the Huhu Sutra, giving rise to the idea of slandering Buddha. It is said that in all the major provinces and counties in the world, only one temple will survive. Even the two Zen temples may not be spared. Su Fengnian laughed and said, I'm more curious about your Beimang swordsman's sword aura approaching that of Huang Qing. Also, Qi Xianxia took ancestor Lu's sword to the south to practice swordsmanship. As for Zhao Luding of the Wu family's sword tomb, I heard that he took his sword maids to the remains of the Wu family's 9 swords, breaking 10,000 horsemen, and took away 3 of his ancestors' ancient swords. His realm increased greatly. This time it was Su Beiji's turn to say helplessly, playing the lute to a cow. Su Fengnian jumped down from the guardrail and said softly, the old monk is unexpectedly dead. Su Beiji was puzzled, the dragon tree monk who presides over the 2 Zen temples. Su Fengnian nodded and said no more. One of them was talking to a chicken and a duck, the other was playing the lute to a cow. It would be boring to continue talking, so they continued on their way. The centipede path under their feet was winding and there were no sights or scenic spots to show, so it was just as boring. When they reached a fork in the road leading up and down the mountain, they saw Su Fengnian walking up the mountain without hesitation. Su Beiji frowned and asked, are you really going to Mount Bubang? Su Fengnian laughed and said, of course. I want to see the charm of a Beimang woman. Unexpectedly, she was defeated and almost lost an arm, yet she still dares to challenge the Mount Bubang's mountain master. If she's beautiful, she can take back the Bailiang. When the time comes, don't fight with me. Su Beiji obviously knew that the last sentence was a joke. He didn't think highly of this persimmon, but he didn't dare to look down on him either. If he acted recklessly, Su Fengnian wouldn't be able to live to this day even if he had 10 lives. Although they had been together for more than 10 years, Su Beiji had never asked about Su Fengnian's level of martial arts. When they were halfway up the mountain, they were stopped by the Mount Bubang's checkpoint. Only then did Su Fengnian realize that travelers had to stop here. Not everyone could go up the mountain to watch the battle. Seeing the curly-bearded man beside him smiling without saying anything, Su Fengnian had no choice but to obediently descend the mountain. As Su Beiji expected, Su Fengnian wasn't so crazy as to want to break through the southern wall. There were 2 routes down the mountain. The 2 of them took a secluded path, purposely avoiding the many martial artists from Beimang who were similarly shut out. At a suitable place for viewing the scenery, there was an elegant pavilion that imitated the architectural style of Jiangnan's water villages. There were no armored guards patrolling outside the pavilion, only a few well-built servants in luxurious clothing. Their qi was profound and their divine splendor was reserved. From what Su Fengnian could see, one of them had entered the second pin. The others were also near the Dragon's Gate's threshold. In the pavilion, there were 2 women, one big and one small, with their backs to them. The young woman was sitting cross-legged, leaning against a pillar with her eyes closed. On her back was a weapon wrapped in a long cloth bag. The little girl was lying on a bench with her hands propped on her cheeks. Inside the pavilion, there were 2 pairs of embroidered shoes, big and small, one green and one red. The little girl was softly singing a small folk song, her voice crisp. The teacher in the private school was asking if she knew who was shouting "Zhi Zhi 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 Zhi" on the tree. The little moon quietly climbed over the hill. Who was in the pond woke up the starlight. Who was at the village entrance ringing the bell? Ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong. Su Fengnian stood where he was, unwilling to leave. Su Beiji saw that the group of unruly retainers were already paying attention to them, eyeing them covetously. He tugged on Su Fengnian's sleeve. The next moment, Su Beiji knew something was wrong, but then he only felt that it was absurd. Su Fengnian swept into the pavilion, his back facing Su Beiji and the unprepared retainers from Mount Bubang, and gently helped the green-clothed woman put on the green-embroidered shoes. Chapter 634. The girl who had finished singing the ballad was lying on the bench. When she turned her head and saw the man barging into the pavilion, she was startled at first, but then her little face lit up like the light after the rain. She was incomparably happy. Su Fengnian helped the green-clothed girl put on the green-embroidered shoes, then turned his head to the little girl and raised his index finger to his lips, making a shushing gesture. The child immediately covered her mouth with both hands, fearing that she would spill the beans. Then, as if she felt that this action was too abrupt, she straightened her clothes and sat up in a rather ladylike manner. Unfortunately, she discovered that she was barefooted, and the pair of peacock satin brocade shoes were still lying on the ground. She blushed slightly. The young man who looked like a scholar easily barged into the pavilion. First of all, the little girl in the pavilion was an important guest of Mount Bubang. She was the sweetheart of Mount Bubang's son-in-law, Fatty Dong. When he went down the mountain, he said that if the little girl was hungry, he would take a gong and drum from his father-in-law, the fifth raccoon dog's courtyard, to every house. Then there was the green-clothed woman who came up the mountain to challenge Mount Bubang. Even though she was defeated, it was honorable. The martial artists of Beimang respected martial arts deeply, and they respected all strong martial artists. Even though she was a young woman of unknown origin, they did not view her as an enemy. Everyone in Mount Bubang treated her as half a guest. Lastly, they were shocked by the strength of the unfamiliar man. These three factors added up, and these were all guests of Mount Bubang. The Mount Bubang's retainer feared them to the extreme. When they barged into the pavilion, a level 2 guest used 2 fingers to touch a small piece of sleeve. However, before this master could grasp it tightly, his hand was bounced away by a technique similar to that of Jianghu. His 2 fingers were still sore and tingling. The atmosphere inside and outside the pavilion was delicate. It was the little girl who broke the deadlock, calling them uncle and uncle. Then, with an unquestionable tone, she asked them to go up the mountain first. This smooth manner that did not hurt the harmony on the surface was obviously taught by her Uncle Dong. These days, Mount Bubang had gotten used to the little girl's maturity. In addition, she was spoiled to the point of being lawless by the Mount Bubang son-in-law who led 60,000 soldiers. After some consideration, the retainers arranged by the fifth raccoon dog quietly left, but they did not go far. They waited outside the pavilion's view, and then one of them went to report the news to Mount Bubang. Su Beiji racked his brains, but he did not expect such a calm ending. However, he did not think too deeply about it. Outside the pavilion, he looked down at the beautiful scenery. His grandfather had once said that Jiangnan's graceful environment was something that Beimang could not compare to. The women there were truly made of water, unlike the women of Beimang who were mixed with sand. After the age of 30, they would often become unbearably rough. Su Fengnian sat side by side with the girl in green. He reached out to take off the long and narrow spear pouch, revealing the true appearance of the instant spear. He asked, "Why did you come to Beimang? Did you beg Su Xiao to come here?" She pressed her cheek against the cool pillar and said softly, "I don't want to lose to Sweet Potato." Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily. Blindly competing. She was silent. Su Fengnian looked at her left arm. "Don't you know how to pick on soft persimmons? You came to Mount Bubang to find trouble with the fifth raccoon dog. Aren't you looking for trouble? I heard that he gave you a lot of face and personally fought." She nodded. Su Fengnian smiled. "Why don't I fight for you later? Your young master has gone through a lot of hardships, had one lucky encounter after another, and achieved great success in his martial arts. Not to mention the fifth raccoon dog, even Tuoba would dare to scold him. Before leaving Wutangan, she could not be said to be obedient to her young master." She shook her head and said softly, "I won't fight. I'll accompany young master back to Biyao." There were only 2 first-class servant girls in the courtyard. She and Sweet Potato each had their own merits. The little girl, who had been left out in the corner, coughed a few times and secretly put on her embroidered shoes. She stared with wide eyes at the heartless man, who did not have the slightest emotion of meeting after a long separation. This made her, who was originally full of joy, feel even more disappointed. She could only kindly remind him that she was still standing there. Su Fengnian could understand why Dong Zhuo had arranged for her to stay in Mount Bubang, but he did not expect to meet her halfway. It was not surprising that she recognized her at a glance. She had the talent to be able to pierce through the heart with qi. Fortunately, she did not expose herself. Otherwise, if Mount Bubang knew about her, she would be exhausted from hunting and fleeing. The taller little girl was holding a small lacquer box in her hand. It was a qiqiao that Su Fengnian had bought for her in the market of Flying Fox City. However, the spiders stored in the box had long died. This ending could not be changed by careful breeding. The lacquer box was originally cheap, and the species of spiders used to qiqiao in weaving webs were also ordinary. Now, there was only a sparse and broken web left in the box. When Dong Zhuo left the mountain, he wanted to secretly hide this qiqiao box and give an excuse that the servants had lost it when cleaning the room. However, he could not endure his daughter's resentful eyes. He had to be thick-skinned and take it out from his sleeve, saying that Uncle Dong had searched the yard and found it with great difficulty. Su Fengnian looked at the little girl who had once been with him through thick and thin. All kinds of feelings welled up in his heart. It was as if a lifetime had passed since the two of them met again. The little girl, Tao Manwu, glanced at Su Beiji, who was carrying a heavy bag outside the pavilion. She remembered that this guy had threatened her with food to carry that big bag of money. She felt a little indignant for that boorish uncle of hers. Then she sighed in her heart. This stingy guy was so stingy that he even missed the porcelain pillow that Aunt Shi had given her. Wherever he went, he would never forget to order others to do manual labor. She had been worried that he would not have enough money to eat these days. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Have you forgotten the qi cultivation skills I taught you?" Tao Manwu immediately practiced the golden beam knocking, sky drum bathing, and so on step by step. There was not the slightest mistake. Su Fengnian took the small lacquer box from her hand and joked, "Why don't you throw this broken thing away? Your Uncle Dong is a mountain of gold and silver. It's not difficult for you to find a qiqiao that is bigger than you. I'll throw it away for you." Su Fengnian pretended to throw it out of the pavilion, but Tao Manwu jumped up with all her strength and clung to his arm tightly. Her whole body was hanging there in a funny way. Chapter 635. Bluebird's eyes were warm. She patted Tao Manwu's head tenderly. She didn't know why the little girl was so close to her. After she was seriously injured, Tao Manwu stuck to her side. She had been recuperating at the foot of Mount Tibing these days. She more or less heard some gossip. She knew that her father was the mayor of Luqing at the border of Beimang. He was attacked for no reason. It was rumored that it was done by two sons of the royal family. However, the murderer's whereabouts were still unknown. Furthermore, the military general Tao Qianji was as close as a brother to Dong Zhuo. The little girl's mother also unfortunately died on the way to her funeral. Ever since Tao Manwu was born, he had been brought along by Dong Zhuo, the most powerful and influential person in the Southern Dynasty's military world. Some time ago, without any warning, Liang Mang broke out into war. It was said that Dong Zhuo led his troops to Ligu's Maolong to provide relief. Thus, Tao Manwu was left behind at Mount Tibing, where he was somewhat related. The young master went to the north alone. Tao Qianji, who liked to kill Beiliang soldiers every day, died on the Qingming festival. The young master happened to be familiar with Tao Manwu. Bluebird stared at the young master with her eyes wide open. The little girl inadvertently glanced at the sister in green whom she had not known for long. Su Fengnian, who knew that she was gifted, did not stop her. The green bird found that the little girl's face was covered in tears after she let go of her hand and landed on the ground. The extremely complicated and contradictory look in her eyes was like a spider web in an expensive and ingenious box. It was so dense that there were no gaps. It should not appear in the eyes of an innocent and kind little girl. Tao Man will only shed tears but did not cry out loud. In the end, she threw the small lacquered box on Su Fengnian and ran out of the pavilion. Blue Bird looked at the young master blankly. Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. She has the ability to see through people's hearts. Blue Bird, who knew that she had unintentionally made a big mistake, was full of regret. When she was about to speak, Su Fengnian waved his hand and put the spear back into the cloth bag. He said calmly, "I didn't want to deceive her for the rest of her life. The sooner she knows the truth, the sooner she can relax. However, it's hard for me to say it myself. It's just nice that she saw through it herself." Although Su Beiji did not know the inside story, he knew that they were in big trouble. When he was about to remind them that they could run for their lives, Su Fengnian had already stood up and returned Sha Na to Blue Bird. He laughed at himself and said, "Let's go, let's go. The three of us can only wait to be hunted down by Bingshan." Su Fengnian grabbed Su Beiji's arm and led Blue Bird, who had no objections, down the mountain. Su Beiji felt like he was riding on clouds. However, the three of them did not escape to the south directly. Instead, they secretly returned to the Ran Mountains. Su Beiji could not help but secretly sigh. It was true that the skilled were bold. Su Beiji, who was good at self-reflection, was a little shaken when he rested by a stream in the mountains. When the scholar went north, he brought many things with him. Chess was one of them. Compared to chess, it was more popular in Beimang. In the past, the king of the northern courtyard, who was very powerful in Beimang, was a veritable terrible chess player. However, when it came to playing chess, he was a master. Su Beiji had been influenced by his grandfather for many years. Although he was very familiar with the 19 paths of Zhongzheng and was very proficient in it, his personal preference was still towards chess. He often played with his grandfather Su Beiji and ended up with a draw. He remembered that when the old man first took out a chess board, he told the young Su Beiji to play this game. Only when he had the ability to draw with Su Beiji would he be considered a master. However, in Su Beiji's eyes, when his grandfather fought with others in the imperial court, he would always cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. His way of doing things was completely different from the way he played chess. It was not until he met his death that Su Beiji realized that in this game of Liang Mang's draw, the price was so great that all the chess pieces of the Su family had died and he was the only one left. Since Su Beiji was a scholar, he naturally regarded himself as a scholar who did not know the 9 palace squares. He looked down on the boorish men of Jianghu. It was also because of this that a scholar assisted the emperor in devising strategies. Why would he need to personally kill the enemy? No matter how strong the masters of Jianghu were, there would always be other masters to kill. It was rumored that the creator of chess, Huang Longsher himself, had brought the role of a scholar to the most exquisite level. The poisoned scholar Huang Sanjia, who said that he would bring peace to the world when he was young, could be said to have poisoned the entire spring and autumn period. Su Beiji greatly admired such a character who transcended the imperial court's calculations and reached the heavens' calculations. However, all of this was built on the chessboard in a favorable situation. Only on the chessboard could Su Beiji display his skills. Being at a disadvantage and attacked by the enemy to the side of the monarch, Su Beiji asked himself if he could turn the tide. Su Beiji suddenly understood why the great official Chao Chongqing, who had studied to become a saint, became a celestial phenomenon martial artist, and why he entered the palace 3 times. When one was at the end of the rope and had no chess pieces to manipulate, in the end, one still had to walk out of the 9 palace squares. The game Su Beiji wanted to enter was Bailiang, which was in a disadvantageous position in a corner, and not Beimang or Liang, which had already gained the upper hand. This was probably the key to why his grandfather had taught him how to draw. To seek victory, one must first consider defeat. Su Beiji could not help but raise his head to look at the young man sitting leisurely on the rock. Then this fellow in front of him had already thought of the worst situation. Bailiang would be completely destroyed and he would have no choice but to kill the enemy alone for revenge? Was it possible? Su Beiji did not believe it. Blue Bird jumped down from a big tree, somewhat incredulous. "Young master, there is no movement from Mount Bubang." Su Fengnian frowned, picked up a stone and threw it into the stream. He was slightly distracted and muttered to himself, "It seems that this account is not clear." On Mount Bubang, the little girl ran away crying. Those who did not dare to leave the pavilion saw this scene and subconsciously wanted to kill their way down the mountain. However, she forced a smile and explained that Sister Tsing-yi was going down the mountain with an acquaintance, so she was a little reluctant. Everyone was skeptical, but they did not ask anything. However, if that girl didn't throw herself into a flame like a moth, then it could be considered a good thing. In the end, even if the mountain chieftain, who had a great reputation in the northern Mang Jianghu, defeated a young girl, it wouldn't sound good if news of this were to spread. Tao Manwa walked for a short distance and did not let the retinue follow her. She turned and ran to the pavilion. When she saw the lacquer box, she bent down to pick it up and was about to throw it down the mountain. However, she raised her hand for a long time and still could not muster up the courage to throw it away. Then, as if she was angry at her own failure to live up to expectations, she ran out of the pavilion, squatted down, dug a hole with her small hands, and buried the box in the soil. She wiped away her tears and returned to the elegant little courtyard on the mountain. She climbed onto the bed, hugged the porcelain pillow and curled up in the corner, using the quilt to hide herself. Chapter 636. This chapter is short on words, so please forgive me. There will definitely be a monthly vote battle in August, so I hope everyone will support me. Nowadays, the world only knows about plum wine, but not instant spear. Su Fengnian sat on a giant rock by the side of the stream. He took off his shoes and socks, placing his feet into the gurgling waters of the refreshing stream. On his knees was this spear, immortal Wang Xiu's relic. Even though Wang Xiu's name carried the word gentle and charming, most of the spear techniques she used in her life were actually the firm and fierce pure yang path. Wang Xiu's innate strength was astonishing since she was young, leading experts into the path of spear techniques. After she became famous, she nurtured her strength through battle, and even single-handedly entered the depths of northern Mang to temper her martial path. She practically slaughtered her way through that generation of northern Mang's martial world, stabbing a huge hole in it. Among the 4 grandmasters of Jianghu in the previous generation, Wang Xiu was also known as the Arm Saint. He used strength to overcome weakness, and his spear was as fast as thunder. The tip of instant spear was round and blunt. Because of Wang Xiu's arm strength and unparalleled spear speed, he didn't care about the sharpness of the spear tip. Wang Xiu's martial arts could be said to be the best in the north of the Central Plains, but his reputation was mixed. Spear Fairy was paranoid, and he killed every enemy he attacked, causing countless hatred. Naturally, Wang Xiu was regarded by many Jianghu people as lacking in martial arts virtue, having the strength of a grandmaster but lacking in general bearing. Wang Xiu, as one of the few external masters, did not regress in his martial arts realm after 60 years of age. His spear skills returned to its original state, and could be called extraordinary. What he learned in his life could be summarized as the 4 words formula. Liang dynasty originally did not believe that Chen Jibao could surpass his master in his early 20s and defeat Wang Xiu fair and square. However, after 2 consecutive battles with Hong Jingyan and ancestor Bronze Man, he did not lose. Liang Beimang began to recognize the little man in white as the undisputed number 1 spear master, and the never-before-seen plum wine began to spread all over the world. Blue Bird stood beside Su Fengnian. She took a moment to tell him about her journey to the north. I first went to a big sect in Gusai State called Sun Spear Forest. The sect leader, Sun Baiyuan, was a famous spear master in the Southern Dynasty. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "This sect must be named after the Wu clan's sword mound. But I've read about Sun Baiyuan in the Tide Listening Pavilion's secret records. He's not simple. He's not a genuine level 1 master, but like many other martial arts geniuses, he skipped the Vajra realm, studied Taoist skills, and touched the threshold of the finger mystery. He's worthy of being called a top master of the finger mystery realm." "How did you defeat him?" "A sneak attack." Blue Bird shook her head and said, "Before I went to the Forest of Spears, I comprehended the collapse of the 4-word formula in the desert. When I arrived at the Sun Spear Forest, Sun Baiyuan's spear skills were a little stagnant and rusty because he hadn't fought personally for a long time. I shattered his skull with one strike. Su Fengnian was suddenly dumbfounded. He laughed and said, "Then how did you escape?" Bluebird said calmly, "I fought and escaped. I was originally an assassin, so I'm good at disguising and hiding. I killed about 70 disciples of the Sun family and comprehended the delaying formula, also known as the back thrust. When I was being chased and trapped in a desperate situation, it was most suitable for me to counterattack." Su Fengnian bent his finger and flicked the dust-free ancient spear lightly, nodding. Bluebird continued, "There was a captain in the prime of his life in the desolate nightmare military town in Gusai State. He had a strange surname and I can't remember his name. I only know that his spear skills were among the top 3 in the Beimang army. Everyone said that his biggest regret was that he didn't have the chance to fight with Qin Jibao. I snuck into the military town and this person happened to be practicing his spear skills in the middle of the night. He was so soft that my collapse of the spear couldn't take advantage of him. After dozens of rounds, I stabbed him in the stomach." At this point, Bluebird smiled and said, "Anyway, it wasn't his turn to kill Qin Jibao. This time, the chase was more difficult. The desolate nightmare military town sent out hundreds of horse fences. I escaped for a whole month. During this time, a few spider web members joined in. They didn't stop until I snuck into Longyao State." Su Fengnian looked at her cold smile and sighed softly. "This Beimang general's surname is Hulu. He was the lover of a powerful royal family in the north. You killed him well. It was revenge for the empress who ordered the Jianghu of Beimang to sneak into Biyao in batches to carry out assassinations. You also let them know what it means to not reciprocate. You and the white-robed monks' return of the courtesy and virtue sect are different approaches to achieve the same result." She shook her head and said, "I only know some crude ways to kill people. How can I be compared to the white-robed monk who is almost a saint?" Since Su Beiji had nothing to do, he stood to the side and listened attentively. This scholar, who originally looked down upon the martial artists of Jianghu from the bottom of his heart, had long been intimidated by Qing Niao's straightforward narration. Hearing this sentence, he softly said, "Only by killing people can you save people. Miss, you don't have to belittle yourself." Bluebird didn't have a good temper to listen to people's casual praise. She shot a cold glance at Su Beiji, which made Su Beiji's scalp tingle. He hurriedly lowered his head and turned his head to look at the stream. Sure enough, everything had its vanquisher. Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. He smiled and introduced, "This is Su Beiji. His grandfather was once the king of Beimang's northern courtyard. Young Master Su is also very knowledgeable and has a bellyful of talent to help the people. This time, he's going back to Biyao with us. I don't know if he'll be willing to give us advice." Bluebird turned her head and nodded her chin slightly as a form of greeting. "Greetings, young Master Su." Su Beiji waved his hand. Bluebird hesitated for a moment. "Young Master, do you know that the 10,000 Longxiang army attacked Gentleman's Pavilion in front and the Great Snow Dragon cavalry crushed Li Gu Maolong behind?" Su Fengnian calmly said, "I heard that Huang Manor didn't have many Longxiang army left. At the mouth of the calabash, they were unlucky and ran into Dongzhuo's personal army. The 4,000 Longxiang army was almost wiped out. They were even stabbed by a spiderweb killer nicknamed Cut Willow." Bluebird bit her lip and didn't say anything. Su Fengnian changed the subject and said with a smile, "Although Sun White Ape and the one surnamed Hulu are both first-class martial art masters and valiant generals, they are still far from being comparable to the 5th raccoon of Bubang Mountain." Bluebird said, "The third formula of the forward formula is arc." Su Fengnian immediately understood. The pinnacle battle that established Wang Xiu's position as a great grandmaster was the battle between this armed saint and red armor that lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. Wang Xiu's arc spear formed the momentum of a flowing river. He didn't give red armor, who was at the peak of his power, a chance to fight back. 3 arcs formed momentum, 9 arcs formed a small circle, 81 arcs formed a large circle, and so on. It was amazing. But the real perfection of the arc spear had to wait until Wang Xiu went to fight Li Chungang, who was also a great grandmaster. At that time, Li Chungang was invincible after drawing his sword and before opening the gate of heaven. At that time, Li Chungang was high-spirited and vigorous. His sword will flourished and was recognized as unparalleled in the world. Before Wang Xianji became famous in one battle, Li Chungang gently pointed at her and forced a barefoot sword fairy from the southern sea back to her sect. Only Wang Xiao was barely able to make Li Chungang fight against him. He was even full of praise for Wang Xiao's arc spear. After the battle, the two drank and Li Chungang even gave some pointers. The arc spear formula was big and wide. It could only be used to its fullest when it met an opponent that it couldn't match. Therefore, there was a heroic saying, "If the arc spear doesn't arc, I will die." Su Fengnian didn't say anything to comfort her. He just moved and patted the stone. Blue Bird hesitated for a moment and sat beside him. Su Beiji looked at the man and woman who were probably master and servant. He remembered the scene in the pavilion where he helped her put on her shoes. Su Fengnian said softly, "When the fifth raccoon comes, leave it to me." Blue Bird held the instant spear tightly and nodded heavily. Chapter 637. The next chapter is 12 o'clock at night. Cleverness overcomes cleverness. Su Fengnian originally thought that he could use the otherworldly item to erase his traces and return to the Ruan Mountains. If the Bingbing Mountains sent out troops to pursue him, they would definitely be led by the nose by the red-robed nascent soul. Little did he know that the fifth raccoon would be waiting for him. The most dangerous place was the safest place. Safe my ass. When Su Fengnian stood up, the otherworldly item was already hanging upside down from a tree like a giant scarlet bat. Su Beiji also sensed that the situation was not good and tacitly threw his luggage to Su Fengnian. After doing so, Su Beiji saw more than 10 elite riders galloping downstream of the stream. The distance between the two sides was less than 20 feet, not enough for an inferior bow to shoot. The Ruan Mountains were rich in iron ore, and the 5 military towns were rich in heavy armor. They were very famous in the Beimang royal court. Except for the valiant-looking man in the lead, who wore a casual purple robe and carried a broad saber and a black scabbard, which was different from the Mang saber, the rest of the retainers and their horses were all wearing heavy armor. There were no roads in the forest for the horses to choose from, but the sound of these riders galloping was negligible to Su Beiji. Su Fengnian stared at the black pigeon on the back of the man with the saber and frowned. Su Fengnian knew that the Ruan Mountain specialized in whistling pigeons. The pigeon in this guy's hand was a 6th-year slave from the Ruan Mountains. It was nicknamed Green Eyes Plus. Unlike most carrier pigeons, this kind of pigeon would only reach maturity after 3 years. 6 years was the best time to send a letter. Its explosive power and long-distance endurance were top-notch, and its homing ability was superb. However, Su Fengnian was a big foppish playboy who trained hawks and dogs, so he was quite familiar with pigeons. Not to mention, he had been hunted by the Tuoba spring falcons on the grassland and suffered a lot. He was very careful when he fled, paying special attention to whether there were any whistling pigeons in the sky. After confirming that there were no problems, he dared to return to the Ruan Mountains. This ambitious and ruthless man of Beimang who controlled both the Bingbing Mountain and a military town was past his middle age. He had the features of a typical Beimang man, but his attire was more similar to that of the southern dynasties. He casually placed his hand on the black scabbard saber. It was made of black python skin, and the scabbard was tied with a rope. It was Raccoon Diwu, the leader of the Bingbing Mountain. He had been observing Su Fengnian all this time. When he saw the young man who was slowly putting his sword on his back look at the carrier pigeon, Raccoon Diwu's mouth twitched. He gently shook his arm in understanding. The 6th-year slave flapped its wings and took flight. However, when it reached the height of the retainer knight's head, it came to an abrupt stop and dropped. It hovered 3 feet above the ground and instantly disappeared into the forest like an arrow. Su Fengnian smiled. He did not need Raccoon Diwu's explanation to understand the mystery. The 6th-year slave's specialty lay in its ability to fly at low altitudes. Raccoon Diwu, who was said to have once saved the Beimang Empress' life, asked the blue bird. His gaze remained on Su Fengnian. I've already agreed to fight you again. Why did you leave without saying goodbye? Su Fengnian replied on his behalf. Since you can't beat me, then don't fight. Women kill and kill. It's a killjoy. In the face of such a scoundrel's words, Raccoon Diwu did not get angry. He only laughed softly and said, Northern Liang Wang Xiu's arc spear is a spear technique that fights for life after death. Where can you find such a good target like me? But then again, the reason why I didn't kill you the first time we fought was because I knew that Spear Fairy King Xiu had a daughter at a young age. It's a pity that this little girl had only used 40 to 50% of the essence of the arc spear. I wanted to fight again and see everything in one go before deciding her fate. After all, Bingbing Mountain is not a restaurant. You want to leave? It's not that easy. But now, compared to the arc spear, I'm more curious about which sect you came from in Beiliang. Using your Central Plains Jianghu lingo, why don't we spar? Su Fengnian looked troubled. You're the mountain master of Bingbing Mountain and a famous Jianghu senior. Isn't it inappropriate for you to lower yourself to the level of a nameless junior like me? Raccoon Diwu let go of his scabbard and placed his hands on the horse's back. He tapped the back of his hand lightly with one finger and shook his head. It's always the new generation that surpasses the old. If we were to calculate based on age and experience, everyone should be cowards. Wait till you're 100 years old before showing off. Su Fengnian laughed. Mountain Master's words are humorous. It's a shame that we didn't meet earlier. Raccoon Diwu said helplessly, you said that you don't want to fight with me. Then can you drive the 3 ancient swords back into the box? The sword chi is not small. If you're determined to fight with me, then let me know. Otherwise, when I make my move, you won't even know how you died. Su Fengnian shook his head and laughed. I'm not fighting. Raccoon Diwu could clearly feel the sharp sword chi of the 3 swords. He laughed coldly. Your moral character is similar to someone with the surname Dong. You're the one I hate the most in my life. However, I only have one daughter to marry. She's treated as a death exemption token. Your luck is obviously much worse. Su Fengnian still had that annoying expression. It doesn't matter. Anyway, your body is still healthy. There's no need to rush to fight with me. Go back to the mountain and give birth to a beautiful daughter. I'll find her in 18 years. Blue Bird wanted to laugh but did not. It was uncomfortable to hold it in. She gripped the end of her spear tightly. Indeed, it was more comfortable to kill people. Raccoon Diwu looked up to the sky and laughed. His eyes started to become extremely gloomy. You're really a monkey carved from the same mold. The 5th raccoon's mount suddenly knelt down on all fours. Its entire back was broken. A purple figure suddenly rose up and hovered in front of Su Fengnian's eyes in an instant. It slashed its saber at Su Fengnian's head. The name of the blade was Dragon Tendon. It was a reward given to meritorious officials after the Empress of Beimeng ascended the throne. Raccoon Diwu was bestowed with this famous blade that symbolized the first martial artist in the imperial tent. Even the military god Tuoba, who had accumulated many military achievements, did not have such an honor. Su Fengnian did not dare to be careless. He climbed to the top of the building with the sword of spring and autumn held horizontally above his head. He originally wanted to use the 3 ancient swords that he had obtained from the Emperor Qin's mausoleum to attack Wei to rescue Zhao. However, before the 3 short swords that had been hidden for 800 years finally saw the light of day again flew to Raccoon Diwu's side, the dragon tendon in the mountain lord's hand pressed down on Su Fengnian's chi, causing the 3 flying swords to show a trace of stagnation. It was indeed unfortunate that he had met his master, whose swordsmanship was far from perfect. It was even more unfortunate that he had met such a superb opponent. The soil by the stream was not solid to begin with. With one strike of the blade, Su Fengnian, who was holding the sword of spring and autumn, sank a full foot into the ground. Raccoon Diwu's body spun in the air, and the dragon tendon brushed past the sword of spring and autumn by 3 inches. With that, Su Fengnian's entire body was sent flying to the side. The soil under Su Fengnian's feet rolled and splattered in all directions. After pulling his feet out of the ground, he flew into the air and stuck to a large tree. As he retreated in defeat, the three ancient swords of the Great Qin did not attack Raccoon Diwu in vain. With a flick of his finger, they were respectively nailed into 3 tree branches in the surroundings. Together with the sword of spring and autumn in his hand, they were finally able to cover the 4 directions of north, south, east, and west. Su Fengnian did not need to think about splitting his attention to control the swords. Against Raccoon Diwu, being distracted was tantamount to suicide. He only hoped that when one of his swords left his hand, he would be able to switch to another sword in time. The soft armor he wore would not be able to withstand the dragon tendon's blade strike. Even if he did not die on the spot, once he was heavily injured, he would be no different from dying. After the blade strike, Raccoon Diwu's aura suddenly condensed. He was indeed worthy of being a big shot of the Beimang Jianghu. Raccoon Diwu deliberately wanted to catch a mouse like a cat. He was not in a hurry to pursue and attack. Instead, he stood where he was and sneered, "You do have some petty tricks. Don't just have some petty tricks. That would really disappoint me." The battle had truly begun. Life and death were on the line. Su Fengnian did not have the leisure to talk. Chapter 638. The only experts that Su Fengnian truly respected were the old man in the sheepskin fur coat and old Huang. They were not the kind of swordsmen who liked to lecture others when they had the upper hand. It was even more impossible for them to be stubborn when they were in a disadvantageous position. One matter, one sword. As they fought, they talked nonsense like the weather was good today. If not, they would sigh about life. Why were they being so wishy-washy? What were they doing earlier? Su Fengnian inhaled and exhaled. He was no longer greedy after controlling multiple swords. Purple qi lingered around him, revealing the blade of his sword to be a foot long. Since ancient times, martial arts competitions could not escape the rule that an inch shorter was an inch riskier. Just like Li Chungang, who once had thousands of flying swords on the Great Snow Plateau. However, the old god of swords himself had earnestly lectured Su Fengnian, who liked to talk about ostentation. This kind of method could be used as a shortcut to cultivate the will of the sword. It could also be used to frighten laymen. However, it was useless against a mortal enemy who was on par with him. Li Chungang straightforwardly gave 2 clear examples. Within a distance of 10 feet, he was confident that he could kill any expert who had not reached the level of Earth Immortal with his green-sleeved snake. Even Ancestor Lu's reincarnation, Qi Xuanzhen, would not dare to let Wang Xianji punch him with all his strength at close range. However, once the distance was increased, as long as one had entered the realm of first pin, anyone could fight with all kinds of tricks. In a true battle of life and death, it was usually decided after a few rounds of close combat. When the old man in the sheepskin fur coat imparted his swordsmanship for the last time, he raised his arm and raised his sword. He said that the sword could open the gates of heaven. It seemed imposing, but it was actually just 3 feet of green sword and 3 feet of qi. Only this was qualified for Li Chungang to boast that he could open the gates of heaven and kill immortals. Su Fengnian's insistence on advancing instead of retreating was in line with Raccoon Diwu's intentions. This mountain chieftain of Emptibing, who had not killed to his heart's content for many years, was afraid that this brat would randomly jump and flee. It would be meaningless to kill him with his dragon tendon saber. Moreover, the interesting thing about the Jianghu was that no matter how high the realm of a martial artist was, they could still learn from others' strong points and smelt them into a furnace for their own use. This was especially true for the 5th raccoon, who was a top-notch master who was almost set in stone. The secret manuals that he could see must have been flipped through long ago, and the people who should be killed had already been killed. Instead, they needed some amazing younger generation to bring along those who were extremely hard to come by. Some geniuses who were not set in stone might still have a long way to go before they were proficient in martial arts, but they usually had some mysterious moves that were like antelopes hanging horns. The 5th raccoon was waiting for this unexpected surprise. It was obvious that this scholar swordsman had really made him sit up and take notice of him. Sword momentum and sword qi rolled like spring thunder. This brat's swordsmanship had reached a high level. The fifth raccoon was certain that he could use chi to control the sword, but he did not expect that the sword and the sword complemented each other, and the momentum could be so magnificent. It was truly a little surprising. The fifth raccoon stood where he was, maintaining a distance of 1 dragon tendon and 1 spring and autumn sword from Su Fengnian. He was willing to become an arrow pile, allowing Su Fengnian's sword chi to strangle him wantonly. He was as motionless as a mountain. The mountain chieftain of Mtibing did not appear on the martial arts roll for a very simple reason. The fifth raccoon would rather be the head of a chicken than the tail of a phoenix. He had never reached the top of the martial arts roll, and was placed side by side with the younger generation. Was that not a disgrace? One had to know that the broken spear Deng Mao, who was ranked 9th in the world, had lost his spear to the fifth raccoon. Deng Mao's realm advanced by leaps and bounds, but the fifth raccoon had been stagnant at the finger-profound realm for a whole 10 years. There was still a layer of unbreakable window paper between him and the celestial phenomenon. How could the proud and arrogant fifth raccoon endure this? The fifth raccoon's beloved daughter, Diwu, had married Dong Zhuo, whom he looked down on. He had been suppressing a lot of resentment. The deputy mountain chieftain Gong Pu had died in battle at the mouth of the calabash, and the guest advisor and Peng Lai's cauldron-carrying slave suffered heavy losses. This made the fifth raccoon even more vexed. Today, he had encountered this young swordsman who had intruded into Mtibing. Why would the fifth raccoon care about who his backer was, and how strong his background was? The fifth raccoon lifted the dragon tendon with one hand to resist the sword chi, and calmly reminded, "It's my turn." Su Fengnian's sword force was already close to a circle, and it was deeply imparted by Li Chuangong's sword technique. It could not be said to have any flaws. However, when the fifth raccoon gently flicked his blade, Su Fengnian's sword chi rolled away the dragon wall. An imperceptible crack appeared on the dragon wall, and it almost collapsed in an instant. After all, things like foundations still needed to be accumulated over time. Naturally, an old ginger was much more pungent than a young ginger. Su Fengnian did not have any fear. The fifth raccoon's defense was watertight, and he did not expect the sword chi to be able to mess up his position. A gap between attack and defense was often a turning point. However, against such an old fox, Su Fengnian could not be smart and take the initiative to show a flaw. He waited for the moment when the fifth raccoon changed from defense to offense. The dragon tendon tore the dragon wall, and Su Fengnian returned the favor. He who had not exhaled a breath gritted his teeth and took another breath. He used all his strength to pull the fuyao, and the sword chi was as thick as a dragon drawing water. The fifth raccoon frowned, and finally, for the first time, his blade technique went from simple to complex. The fuyao tornado was split into pieces by the dragon tendon blade. He took a step forward, stretched out his left arm, and slapped Su Fengnian's forehead. Su Fengnian's body flew out like a kite with a broken string, but he still took advantage of the situation to step on the fifth raccoon's chest. His luxurious purple clothes were covered with an eyesore of dusty footprints. After the fifth raccoon flicked away a poisonous hidden weapon with his finger, he gently brushed away the dust on his chest. That light kick was only a feint, and the killing move was still a small flying sword that was aimed at his eyeballs. The fifth raccoon said without batting an eyelid, "So not only can you control the long sword in the case, you can also use the short sword in your sleeve. However, since I am known as Beimang's most senior finger xian martial artist, I can be considered to have some understanding of the xian of finger xian. Whether it is the movement of qi, or the more concealed intentions, I can predict 70 to 80% of them. If you don't believe me, and if there are still some hidden flying swords, there is no harm in flying them out one by one. I will close my eyes and not use my blade. How about it?" After Su Fengnian landed on the ground, he bent his knees and slid backwards. He slid from the side of the stream into the middle of the stream before stopping. After he stood up in the water, there was a bit of undisguised ridicule in his eyes. The fifth raccoon was well aware of this, and found it more and more interesting. This kid really was not a fledgling. Usually, those noblemen who came from prestigious sects and schools wanted to make a name for themselves in Jianghu after learning some skills. Suddenly, they met an opponent who was much stronger than them. This kind of psychological attack was extremely easy to succeed. Before the battle to the death, their momentum would be weakened by more than half, and after that, they would be at the mercy of their opponent. The fifth raccoon had seen too many of these kinds of newborn calves, and they all died prematurely at the hands of seniors who did not cherish talent. Therefore, the martial arts geniuses that the fifth raccoon cultivated on Mount Bubang were all abnormally cold-blooded. They were either thrown into the front line of the army to be polished, or sent to assassinate strong people who were a bit stronger than them. They were definitely not like the chess and sword music school, who protected their calves and blindly spoiled them under their wings. The fifth raccoon raised his blade and walked slowly. The dragon tendon blade's originally inconspicuous blade aura became more and more restrained. I promise that if you can leave this stream, I will let you live. Once he started thinking about escaping, there really was no need to fight anymore. Su Fengnian spat out a mouthful of turbid air, and directly called out his name. Fifth raccoon, you are a genuine finger-profound realm expert. Time and again, you have to play mind games with a junior like me. Don't you find it annoying? The fifth raccoon shook his head. Comparing skills with others and taking people's lives with one move is something I did a long time ago. It's not easy to catch a fish like you in the net, so I really can't bear to kill you quickly. As he spoke, the fifth raccoon slashed out again. The range of his arms swinging out far exceeded the previous move, and the momentum was also far greater than the initial slash that broke the horse's back. The qi in Su Fengnian's body circulated, and his acupoints were like golden lotuses. He leaped out of the water and welcomed the slash. Su Fengnian integrated the rising hand-shaking Kunlun into his sword move. Just as his figure rose, it fell and sank to the bottom of the water. Then, the entire stream, with the fifth raccoon and Su Fengnian as the central axis, exploded towards the upstream and downstream sides of the stream. The final sound was already transmitted from a few miles away. That central axis had already split open the bank of the stream, leading to the depths of the forest. This slash did not seem like a slow killing technique. A few days ago, there was a rainstorm in the Ro-Ran mountain range, causing the stream to be deeper than a person's. After Su Fengnian was forced to the bottom of the water by the slash, he disappeared without a trace. The fifth raccoon stepped lightly on the surface of the water, and occasionally slashed down with his slash. The stream, which was originally as calm as a young lady washing clothes, shook violently, soaking the shore. There were even ravines that spread to the shore, and it was a shocking sight. The fifth raccoon was extremely patient, slowly slashing the stream, waiting for the moment when the kid was desperate and wanted to leave the stream. He was also waiting for the next surprise. He believed that this young swordsman still had some trump cards that could save his life. But the fifth raccoon was surprised to find that he seemed to be losing his patience. The matured De Ji Xian realm had all kinds of mysteries. There was the ability to draw water with a bamboo basket, and also the mirror flower water moon technique. The fifth raccoon frowned. He slashed water 19 again. The stream water was extremely turbid. The fifth raccoon did not plan to waste any more time. Although Su Fengnian, who was escaping in a sorry state like a swimming fish, looked like his life was hanging by a thread, his heart was as calm as still water. Borrowing intent to nurture intent. Closing the sheath to nurture intent was originally Li Chuangong's original creation that made thousands of swordsmen of the younger generation praise. Su Fengnian had to find another way. After practicing the sword, he used the sword intent to nurture the saber intent. Now, there was an even more accurate saying, which was to use its intent to nurture one's own intent. Old man, you slash the stream water, I nurture intent. Chapter 639. August has arrived. This is the first time I'm formally asking for monthly votes in Zongheng. The second volume, Going to Beimeng Alone, will definitely come to a successful conclusion this month. In front of her, no one dared to claim to be from a family of spear arts. Wang Xiu's status in the world of spears was like Li Chuangong's status in the way of the sword. The dozen or so Ruren cavalrymen were confident in their superior horsemanship and the outstanding strength of their warhorses. They raised their spears at the same time, but the distance between the two sides was extremely close. No matter how excellent the bloodlines and training of the warhorses were, they could not charge forward explosively while carrying a heavy armored cavalryman. The two warhorses trotted forward at the same time, taking the lead to charge towards the beautiful woman in green. These dozen or so cavalrymen were competitive cavalrymen who had followed their mountain chieftain for many years on the battlefield. They were extremely proficient in dealing with armored soldiers and people of the Jianghu. Two pitch-black metal spears came down from above. One thrust and the other swept. The left thrust towards Blue Bird's forehead, while the right swept towards Blue Bird's shoulder. Blue Bird was once an assassin who would do anything to achieve her goals. After practicing the spear, her method of killing changed completely. It was in line with Wang Xiu's ferocious and demonic spear arts. Especially when Wang Xiu's instant spear was used by a woman like Blue Bird, it was even more pleasing to the eye. The instant spear was thrust out. It was clearly a simple and straight thrust, but the spear's body actually bent in a strange arc. The scarlet spear's outer arc collided with the spear that was aimed at the cavalry's forehead. After the collision, the instant spear used the force of the impact to curve again. The tip of the spear instantly changed direction, causing the sweeping spear to be deflected. Then, the instant spear stabbed straight, piercing through the warhorse's head and piercing the chest of the armored soldier on the horse's back. The spear's body bent in an arc, and the spearhead's momentum collapsed, causing the cavalryman's breastplate to explode. He was sent flying into the air, dead before he even landed on the ground. Wang Xiu's collapse word formula hurt people's flesh and blood, as well as their meridians and qi. The chief assassin of Spider Web, One Willow, could let the sword's qi take root. This kind of insidious swordsmanship was actually comprehended from Wang Xiu's spear arts. Wang Xiu traveled the world with his spear arts. He never gave in when he met enemies, and he was even more ruthless. In the past 20 years in Beimang, there were countless martial artists who studied Wang Xiu's spear arts. Wang Xiu was like a flood dragon in the Yellow River. After his death, the younger generation explored the river and searched for treasures. Blue Bird had seen Wang Xiu, a martial arts fanatic, practice the spear since she was young. She was close to him, and she had inherited her father's talent. Her understanding of the four-word formula was far from what outsiders like One Willow could imagine. At that time in Beiyang's martial arts world, the Wang family could always see a little girl in the inner courtyard. Regardless of whether it was cold or hot, she would practice the spear step by step and elbow by elbow. Her hands were full of calluses, and she would constantly pull out a wooden pole. The green bird trembled in the midst of the collision and wrapped itself around an iron spear. The tip of the spear in its hand drew a majestic circle, and a knight's entire head was taken off. She kicked the abdomen of a warhorse that brushed past her, and the rider and horse were thrown 3 to 4 feet away. In the midst of the attack, she tiptoed and dodged the stabbing of the two spears. Her palms slid to the middle of instant, and the spear rotated in a big circle. The big circle had the same arc as instant spear, swinging in the air like a horse rope. After the momentum was accumulated to perfection, with instant as the center of the circle, within 20 steps, 3 riders, including their armor and warhorses, were cut off. Some were cut off at the waist, and some were beheaded. Qing Miao continued to charge forward with her back bent. In an instant, she happened to fly beside her hand. She struck out with her spear and stopped 3 inches in front of a knight's face. Before the knight could secretly rejoice that this woman who killed people like scything flax had exhausted her qi, the bystanders only saw his face collapse. It was a horrible sight. Blue Bird patted the shaft of her spear lightly, and instant circled behind her, blocking a sharp iron spear that was chopping down like a knife. The arc could kill people, but it could also be used for defense. With her back facing the rider, she knocked on the spear with both arms, and instant spear immediately hit the rider's chest. Blue Bird turned around and took a big step back with her right foot. The moment she grasped the rebounded spear, it changed from horizontal to vertical, and stabbed a big hole in the abdomen of the pale-faced rider. Blue Bird lifted her spear slightly, and the huge force caused the rider who was still alive to fly into the sky. She pulled out her spear and poked and stirred again and again, and the armored soldier's corpse exploded. Around her, there were only a few riders who could stand. The remaining few riders looked at each other and they were all ready to fight to the death. Blue Bird looked at the storm on the other side of the stream from the corner of her eyes. She had to kill them faster. Su Beiji even wanted to die. The scholar who didn't believe in ghosts and gods was now grabbed by the forearms of an otherworldly creature that looked like a red bat and hung on a big tree far away from the danger zone. Previously, when he looked at it from afar, the red-robed nascent soul always showed its face and its forearms were all tucked into its big sleeves. Now, Su Beiji looked at the compassionate face of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva from a close distance and he could clearly feel its forearms. He silently closed his eyes. He once argued with his grandpa about the annotation of the 7 words, Confucius does not speak of strange forces and gods. Su Beiji had the same opinion as the Confucians of the past. He translated strange forces and gods into strange forces and rebellions. Su Beiji thought that it should not be simply based on the Confucians' criticism of the school of Moism's worship of ghosts and gods. Strange forces and rebellions were not side by side, but separated. Strange was used as a verb, and gods referred to the mind. At this moment, Su Beiji felt that he had made a big mistake. He was chanting scriptures and mantras. Chapter 640. The otherworldly item didn't pay any attention to the scholar who looked like he had fallen into an ice cellar. Its happy face looked into the distance as if it was hesitating whether to help or not. The otherworldly item with the green python armor under the wide sleeves of its vermilion robe threw away the burden in its hand and threw Su Beiji to the ground. Its delicate body, which could be considered exquisite even if one didn't look at its 2 faces and 4 arms, slowly floated up until it was above the branch at the top. Its wide sleeves swayed, setting off the snow-white and eye-catching bare feet. Su Beiji coincidentally raised her head and saw this scene. She shuddered even more. Could it really be a ghost that had escaped from Fengdu? Yuanying twisted its neck stiffly. In its vision, there were many soldiers who had abandoned their horses and were advancing up the mountain like a swarm of locusts. The otherworldly item rubbed its belly and burped. Ordinary people burped when they were full, but it only burped when it was hungry. On the stream, Raccoon Diwu sneered, "Let's see how long you can hide." The mountain master of Mount Tibbing was truly enraged. He threw the dragon tendon behind him. When he crushed the horse's back, he pulled out his saber. The scabbard with the golden thread attached to it was left near the dead horse. It was stuck in the ground. With this throw, the dragon tendon returned to its scabbard. Raccoon Diwu wasn't famous for its knife skills. Since it had broken Dang Mao's spear with its bare hands, it was clear that something was wrong. After Raccoon Diwu abandoned its knife, it glanced at the undulating stream downstream and sneered. It no longer floated above the stream and dived into the water like Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian finally appeared. His whole body was soaked, and he was holding the spring and autumn sword with sword aura like the wind. The stream quickly retreated from the top of his head to his waist and knees. In the end, only the water stains were left on the soles of his feet. There was no way out and nowhere to hide. The area occupied by Raccoon Diwu became the dividing line. The stream was blocked by the purple-clothed man and couldn't get close to the line. The turbulent and turbid stream stopped behind him and continued to spread to both sides. The stream was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, like a yellow dragon that could devour people at any time. Su Fengnian did something that made Raccoon Diwu feel strange. He put the spring and autumn sword back into its scabbard. The scabbard meant Raccoon Diwu had something to rely on. The sword returned to its scabbard. Was he in a hurry to reincarnate? Raccoon Diwu ran forward in big strides like thunder. With every step the man took, the stream behind him moved 1 step forward. Su Fengnian retracted his palm with his palm facing inwards and pushed out with his palm facing outwards. The 12 flying swords formed a semicircular sword. It was created with the method of tying the black strands, which gave it the rather resounding name of the lightning pool. Raccoon Diwu, on the other hand, defeated 10 people with 1 strength without any fancy moves. When they were 5 steps apart, it twisted its body sideways and punched fiercely. Su Fengnian used his palm to block the fist that could destroy cities and shake mountains. His feet sunk into the mud until it reached his knees. He used the pagoda holding style and stacked it on the back of his palm. Unexpectedly, he did not evade the punch. Raccoon Diwu's anger overflowed. It pressed down again and again. The mud under Su Fengnian's knees splashed out faster than an arrow. The stream behind Raccoon Diwu swayed violently. Su Fengnian's sword formation condensed and did not disperse. It was not to make an unnecessary attack, but to borrow the sword embryo of the 12 flying swords to support the big yellow courtyard. The man and the sword formation were in harmony. Raccoon Diwu kicked out. The expressionless Su Fengnian's right palm slapped down, while his left palm pushed towards Raccoon Diwu's chest. It did not disperse the kick, nor did it touch Raccoon Diwu's purple clothes. Su Fengnian only dissipated some of the force, but it was in vain as he slid backward. His feet and the knife cut a gully at the bottom of the stream. Without waiting for Su Fengnian to stand still and take a breath, Raccoon Diwu's leg swept towards his neck. Su Fengnian tilted his shoulder and blocked with both hands. Just by looking at the extent of the semicircular sword formations trembling, one could tell that this kick was powerful. Su Fengnian's entire body sank into the muddy river wall that was as tall as a person. Raccoon Diwu stepped on Su Fengnian's chest and pushed his back a few feet into the muddy wall. He leisurely shook his head and teased, "Fortunately, you have 12 flying swords that are not inferior to the Wu family's sword tomb. If you don't take people's heads, can they still be considered flying swords?" Raccoon Diwu's hands reached into the air and grabbed. Then, his 5 fingers formed a hook. A brand new sword formation that was formed by a thunder pool was torn apart by the enormous force. Su Fengnian did not give him the opportunity to destroy the thunder pool. He knocked Raccoon Diwu with his shoulder. Raccoon Diwu pulled on the sword formation with one hand and waved his other arm horizontally. Su Fengnian's chi dynamic that was sent flying to the sides suddenly lost its traction with the sword formation. Raccoon Diwu stomped on the ground and leaped high. He struck with his elbow towards Su Fengnian, who had not yet stabilized his body. A huge pit that was more than 10 feet wide and 10 feet long appeared at the bottom of the river. This was the result of Su Fengnian using Fata Morgana to reduce 80 to 90% of Raccoon Diwu's elbow force. Raccoon Diwu laughed sinisterly. "You dare to challenge me with just this weight?" Raccoon Diwu stood still. He no longer chased after Su Fengnian, who was in a sorry state. He pulled out a mighty stance of a celestial being, throwing a cauldron, and threw a punch in the air. Su Fengnian's chi dynamic speed climbed to the peak since he started practicing martial arts. Both of his hands drew circles, but he was still unable to completely eliminate the strong wind from this punch. After his body was hit, he bent like a bow. Black blood seeped out from the corner of Su Fengnian's mouth. He said in a muffled voice, "I once whipped a famous horse while drunk." Raccoon Diwu mercilessly unleashed a crushing attack. At the bottom of the river, the purple-clothed swordsman was shining brightly. He continuously attacked and retreated. At the bottom of the river, he had already fought for a distance of 1 li. Raccoon Diwu did not even hear Su Fengnian's next sentence clearly. "I once threw away 1,000 gold coins when I was young." Raccoon Diwu seized an opportunity to grab Su Fengnian's legs and threw him into the river behind him. Su Fengnian's body cut through the turbulent river water. He cut through more than half a li in one breath. Su Fengnian knelt on one knee and flicked the spring and autumn sword scabbard on his back. "I once changed spring and autumn for spring thunder." The spring and autumn sword flew out together with the scabbard and pierced towards a traveling bag. Su Fengnian unsheathed the spring thunder in his hand. After Su Fengnian stood up straight, he bent his knees slightly and put 2 fingers on his right hand together. The tip of the spring thunder in his left hand pointed directly at Raccoon Diwu. I, Tseng Shidi kill Xian finger. Chapter 641. The blade in his left hand. The stream flowed down on both sides. The 5th raccoon was like a mainstay. It squinted its eyes at the young swordsman who was accumulating power. According to the mountain master's style of doing things 20 years ago, he should have broken the momentum early and killed him in one fell swoop. However, when the 5th raccoon reached the mysterious finger realm, his vision suddenly became clear. It was as if a long scroll had been opened. The content was to prove immortality. The first part of the scroll asked for immortality. The tail of the scroll pointed to immortality. After flipping through the scroll for more than 10 years, the fifth raccoon was influenced by the realm. There were subtle changes in its temperament and it became calmer. This did not mean that the fifth raccoon was beginning to be good. Instead, it meant that after reaching the mysterious finger realm, there were traces to follow and laws to rely on. Although the fifth raccoon did not know that Su Fengnian was using its dragon tendon stream / to cultivate the divine will, the fifth raccoon was also waiting for Su Fengnian to help his mysterious finger longevity scroll to check and fill in the gaps. In the eyes of the fifth raccoon, it was a wonderful process of dismembering the divine will and turning it into a move. It was precisely because the one-sleeve green dragon was born from Li Chuangang's two-sleeve green snake was too mysterious that the fifth raccoon was especially patient. Every time it increased its qi, the fifth raccoon would be able to understand it more thoroughly. After that, he would benefit greatly. The fifth raccoon did not kill Blue Bird because he wanted the essence of the arc spear. The reason why he kept Su Fengnian alive was because he did not think that an unknown junior would be a threat to him. He slowly lured him and let him use a few trump cards for him to comprehend. Why would the fifth raccoon not do so? The fifth raccoon had comprehended the fishing the moon in a bamboo basket technique that only a fusionren in the finger Xian realm could achieve. Simply put, it was a kind of ability to copy a gourd and draw a ladle. To fish the moon in the water, when the bamboo basket was lifted, the water would ripple and the full moon would shatter. However, the fifth raccoon could piece together a small piece of the moon in his psyche. In the 100 years of Jianghu, there were only a handful of people with this kind of talent who could remember everything at a glance. It was not an exaggeration to say that it happened once in 100 years. Wang Xianji from the martial emperor city was one of them. So far, no one had heard of a second person. This was also the reason why Wang Xianji had a hobby of watching masters fight before he became famous. When a layman watched a fight between level 1 masters, besides the excitement, what could he see even if he opened his eyes wide? As for the fifth raccoon's Xian finger, it was the hard work of dripping water to penetrate a stone. Only after reading it 100 times would its meaning be revealed. In addition to its unique talent and various opportunities, only then would it be able to attain Xian finger. The saber momentum was like a flood that filled a lake. Fortunately, there was no one watching the battle. Otherwise, the fifth raccoon's next move would definitely stupefy everyone. The fifth raccoon imitated Su Fengnian and bent his knee slightly. He made a saber gesture and pointed it at Su Fengnian. However, the fifth raccoon quickly dispelled the idea of applying what he had just learned. It was not difficult to make it look similar, but it was unexpectedly difficult to make it resemble the spirit. This made the fifth raccoon somewhat puzzled. What kind of saber technique could make him, who was already at the finger Xian realm, find it difficult to imitate? The fifth raccoon originally thought that a junior who had just entered the Vajra realm would be able to grasp 80% of the spirit easily. It seemed that it had underestimated this brat who cultivated both saber and sword. The moment the fifth raccoon sheathed his saber, the Spring Thunder Saber Sleeve Green Dragon suddenly swept in front of the mountain master of the weapon-raising mountain. It was unclear whether it was a saber technique or a sword intent. The fifth raccoon's eyes was filled with green chi that covered the sky and earth. It had the aura of surging 3,000 miles in one breath. The green dragon's head pounced towards the fifth raccoon. Its body was several hundred feet long. It rolled and charged, bringing with it the muddy yellow stream water. It was just like the green dragon drinking water. Wherever the green dragon went, the stream water would be sucked out of the stream. It either merged with the green dragon's body to make its scales or was swept to the shore. This made the green dragon sleeve green dragon situation astonishing. Not to mention the lethality, it was full of spirit. The fifth raccoon was secretly surprised and decided to get rid of this brat. This new talent of the Jianghu might be qualified to compete with him for the 10 precious chairs of the 10 people of the world in the future. Controlling a sword was different from controlling a sword that was as different as heaven and earth. However, a normal swordsman who could control a sword for several feet was considered a master. However, there were exceptions. The Wu family's sword tomb had an exaggerated saying of a child controlling a sword to pierce a butterfly. Therefore, to the experienced and knowledgeable fifth raccoon, the Su Fengnian's flying sword to injure people was not considered a shocking technique. However, this green dragon sleeve blade that the fifth raccoon could not copy was a different matter. The fifth raccoon revealed a serious expression for the first time. He extended his palm and blocked the green dragon's head. He only slid back a few feet with his left leg. The green and yellow-green dragon sleeve blade swayed ferociously. The space in front of the fifth raccoon seemed to be swaying in the wind and rain. The fifth raccoon had no choice but to use his left fist to smash the green dragon's head that had condensed its chi. The huge head fell to the bottom of the stream with a loud bang. A deep well was forcefully dug out and the stream water continuously flowed into it. The 3 feet green dragon soared and 3 feet chi. Every time it got closer, it would kill 30 feet. The real killing move was revealed after the fifth raccoon smashed the leaking chi. The spring thunder blade that had been pointed at the fifth raccoon was only 5 feet away. The wide purple robe shook violently. The hair on the fifth raccoon's temples fluttered backwards. His right hand bent 2 fingers and clamped the spring thunder blade's tip. Mysterious finger, mysterious finger. This was the supreme supernatural power of bending one's fingers to knock on longevity. The spring thunder blade in his left hand advanced. Chapter 642. This time, Raccoon Diwu was forced to retreat a few feet. During that time, he tapped the blade more than 100 times. With each tap, the sound of thunder could be heard from somewhere near the two of them. In the blink of an eye, there were 100 claps of thunder. Raccoon Diwu flicked his finger and tapped on the spring thunder every time. He tapped on the longevity and tapped on the gaps in Su Fengnian's chi circulation. As long as there was a trace, Raccoon Diwu would be able to seize the opportunity. Not only would he be unable to discard his blade, but he would also be able to break all of his meridians and shatter all of his acupoints. What made Raccoon Diwu shocked was that the young man in front of him was not only unconventional in the way of the sword, his blade was even more ferocious. The crucial point was that his chi circulation was abundant to an unimaginable degree. Raccoon Diwu, who was a late bloomer, admitted that at the young man's age, his chi circulation was not even half complete. With a flick of his finger, Raccoon Diwu was unable to grasp the slightest flaw. This made Raccoon Diwu furious. He glared and shouted. He no longer blocked the spring thunder blade head-on. Su Fengnian, who had his eyes closed all this time, twisted his wrist. The spring thunder spun in his left palm and slashed at Raccoon Diwu's waist. 1 life for 1 life. Su Fengnian dared to do it, but Raccoon Diwu was not willing to do it. Raccoon Diwu's body twisted like a loose coil. However, the punch that had lost most of its sharpness still smashed onto Su Fengnian's head. At the same time, Su Fengnian returned the punch. His body swayed like a bell on Mount Wudong. He did not fall and took the opportunity to step on Raccoon Diwu's chest again. This time, compared to the first time, it was much more ferocious. The purple-clothed mountain master, who had been strolling leisurely, was also kicked to the point that her body became unstable. Su Fengnian, who had his eyes closed, retreated a few steps. He did not suffer any serious injuries. This was all thanks to the golden lotus nurtured by the great yellow courtyard. 108 golden lotuses bloomed at once. 54 golden lotuses withered in an instant. 54 golden lotuses bloomed in an instant. Raccoon Diwu had the mentality of not sitting in the hall. He did not think that he would put himself in danger. Su Fengnian, on the other hand, was truly going all out from the very beginning. The reason why the longevity lotus could bloom again was because Su Fengnian had risked his life to nurture it. Spring lightning was no longer in his hand, but the next move did not require him to hold a sword. Su Fengnian gently pressed his hands down. The spring thunder behind the fifth raccoon floated up. The earth emitted killing intent, winding for 6,000 li. Neither the man nor the spring thunder saber moved, but Raccoon Diwu continued to throw out punches. The scene was absurd. There were some people and some things that were not mentioned, but that did not mean that they had been forgotten. Oftentimes, only things that could be easily spoken of would fade away. Su Fengnian was not the kind of rich and powerful son who was shrewd from the start. He was also not the kind of son of a feudal lord who understood the hardships of others from the start. There was the cultured and refined Shen Jibao, the flattering Chu Lushan, the serious Yuan Zuozong, and so on. Other than these people who surrounded Su Shao in Bailiang Palace, there were many unfathomable faces that made Su Fengnian hide behind Su Shao. Only the two old men who made the cold-hearted Su Fengnian feel grateful from the bottom of his heart had passed away. Old Huang, who lacked front teeth and loved drinking rice wine, did not have the chance to know how Li Chungang was when he was young. Before leaving the city, Old Huang seemed to have already known that he would not be able to return to the martial emperor city. At that time, he talked a lot, including one sentence, "Young master, Old Huang, am not as good as other great swordsmen. I only know 9 sword moves. 6 of them were comprehended before I died. In fact, I'm not afraid of death, but I'm afraid that I won't be able to drink rice wine. Otherwise, I'm thinking that I haven't married in this life, so it's a waste for me to come to this world. At that time, I was always afraid that there would be no one to toast at my grave. This time, it's different. Why do I feel that the sword competition is worth it?" At that time, Su Fengnian mentioned it, saying how unlucky it was. Old Huang grinned, missing his front teeth. Su Fengnian was more afraid of death than anyone else. If he died, would he still need the old Su Shao to visit his grave? Li Chungang broke 1,000 armor with one sword move at Guangling River. After that, he escorted Su Fengnian back to Bailiang. On the way, Su Fengnian asked the old man who he had fought the most dangerous battle of his life. At that time, the one-armed old man was sitting in the carriage and scratching his feet. He thought for a while and pointed to his arm. However, he did not say the name of that person. He just smiled and digressed, "Young Master Su, remember this old man's words. When you are about to die, don't think about life and death." These 2 old men who had climbed to the top of Jianghu had gradually been forgotten. It was like every spring festival, when the old talismans were replaced by new peaches on the doors of every household. Su Fengnian slowly opened his eyes. Between the Yin realm and the Yang realm, there was a leisurely exchange of qi. He once saw with his own eyes a celestial being leaving his body in a dream at night on the peak of a mountain. He also once stood between a dragon and a python. He once said that he wanted to slay a dragon and a celestial being. Li Chungang said that when he first picked up a sword, he knew that he would become the world's top swordsman. Su Fengnian used 6 years of his life in exchange for a blade. The great python swallowed the sky. The world was silent, and the stream flowed slowly. The 5th raccoon slowly lowered its head. The tip of a blade was an inch out of its chest. Su Fengnian, with black blood flowing out of his 7 orifices, pulled out the spring thunder saber. He turned the tip of the saber and held the 5th raccoon's neck with one hand. One blade, another blade, another blade. Again and again, he repeatedly stabbed the 5th raccoon's body. Chapter 643. As expected of a martial artist at the pinnacle of the Finger Xian realm. Other than the near-fatal strike that pierced through the heart, the 5th raccoon's expression did not change at all in the following strikes. He merely looked down indifferently at the young man who seemed to be possessed by the devil. However, the 5th raccoon's Vajra physique was destroyed by the initial strike. The tricky part was that it was similar to a willow branch bursting with murderous intent. The 5th raccoon's boundless inner energy was unable to gather the scattered qi in a short period of time. It was as if the sword immortal had carved out several ravines and diverted them. Furthermore, the 5th raccoon's later strikes were all meticulous. They were all aimed at the key acupuncture points, like a river flowing in and diverting the flow, digging a few large wells. Although the 5th raccoon did not show any signs of weakness, he knew that he had truly failed miserably this time. The mountain master of Troop Raising Mountain said hoarsely, "How did the last strike come about?" Su Fengnian looked coldly at the Finger Xian realm expert. He did not say anything and only gave him another strike. This strike was not easy to come by. It was unimaginable to outsiders. He borrowed Li Chuangang's 2 sleeves green snake and sword to open the gate of heaven, borrowed Old Huang's 9 swords, borrowed Dong Tai and the devil Luo Yang from the battle outside Dunhuang, borrowed dragon tree monk's lion's roar in the canyon, and even borrowed dragon slaying in his dream on the mountaintop that night. Everything he had seen with his own eyes was integrated into that strike. When the Longhu celestial master Zhao Shituan visited Baoyang Palace for the first time, he had privately told Su Fengnian his fortune. However, he did not say anything outright. He only said that if His Royal Highness did not meet with a calamity, it would not be a problem for him to live for 60 years. Su Fengnian didn't really believe in these prophecies, but for someone who was most familiar with the pros and cons of going against the flow of the Great Yellow Court, Su Fengnian weighed this knife in his mind. He was afraid that he would lose about 6 years of his lifespan, which was originally 60 years. This made Su Fengnian, who never made a losing deal, think about it and give the fifth raccoon another knife. You and I both know very well that you can only leave the Ran mountain range alive if you do not kill me. That's because 800 armored soldiers have already ascended the mountain. Even if you are possessed by a sword immortal, you will not be able to slay the Ran garrison's constant stream of 6,000 cavalry. I'm afraid this is also the reason why you haven't taken my life yet. Su Fengnian grinned and poked another vital acupuncture point on the purple-clothed man. The fifth raccoon, who was being held by the neck, was really powerful. Even in such a situation, he still looked like an expert who was sure to win. This kind of determination was really creepy. Blood dripped from the corner of the fifth raccoon's mouth. With a calm expression, he said, I can promise you that I will not take revenge today. Once you leave the Ran mountain range, I will send people to hunt you down. The fifth raccoon did not say any of those lofty words about letting bygones be bygones, nor did he boast about keeping his promises. However, it was precisely because of these straightforward words that, in a situation where they were mortal enemies, that it was somewhat convincing. Su Fengnian raised his head and asked, You don't believe that I'll stab you in the heart again? The fifth raccoon remained silent as a mocking smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Su Fengnian stopped but did not retract his blade. He said self-deprecatingly, There's no such thing as an opportunist in this world. I know that you also have the means to avoid death or to trade a life for a life, but you're the mountain master of the army banishing mountain. You have a high position and authority, not to mention the possibility of touching the threshold of Earth Immortal, so don't think about dying together with a small character like me. This isn't a good deal at all. As for me, I'll still stab you without hesitation. You're a magnanimous person, so please forgive me. Otherwise, once you reconnect your Qi, I won't be a match for you no matter what. The fifth raccoon laughed until he started coughing. However, he still nodded his head, displaying the bearing of an ambitious and ruthless person. Su Fengnian lamented in his heart. Could he not be so infuriating that he could still talk and laugh after suffering such a heavy injury? While lamenting, he gently released his grip and allowed the fifth raccoon to land on the ground. However, the spring thunder blade had already pierced into the purple-clothed man's juk acupuncture point and he did not plan to pull it out. Only by doing so could Su Fengnian be at ease. If not for the fact that they were in the fifth raccoon's territory, Su Fengnian would have pierced through all the acupuncture points on this fellow's body. The otherworldly nascent soul had returned while rubbing its belly. Its mouth was scarlet red, but it was the blood of the Ruran soldiers. It looked like it had eaten its fill. It carried Su Beiji back from the forest. Bluebird put away the luggage and carried it on her back. The 3 great Qin steel swords were also returned to their sheaths. Caution is the parent of safety. Su Fengnian put away the 9 flying swords in his sleeves. The 3 Taiyao Morning Dew golden strands of sword embryo were nailed into the fifth raccoon's 3 major acupuncture points, the Xuanji Dovetail Divine Watchtower. Together with the spring thunder blade, they completely suppressed the fifth raccoon's Qi. The mountain lord of the army carrying mountain smiled faintly. He did not resist and allowed this cautious young man to lay out his plan. The more composed the fifth raccoon, whose luxurious purple clothes were in tatters, was, the more cautious Su Fengnian became. Without needing Su Fengnian to say anything, the fifth raccoon waved his hand and signaled the soldiers surrounding them to retreat. The group descended the mountain and walked to the foot of the mountain. The mountain lord of the army carrying mountains retainers brought over 4 warhorses according to the 5th raccoon's order. After confirming that they had not been tampered with, Su Fengnian and the 5th raccoon rode on the same horse. Then, they asked for 4 more warhorses from the Ruran cavalry. Blue Bird and the otherworldly item Su Beiji each rode a warhorse and followed closely behind. The 5th raccoon had no intention of letting the Ruran cavalry tail them. He ordered this cavalry troop that had been attacked by the otherworldly item to stay at the foot of the mountain. He urged his horse to gallop down south. Chapter 644. Diwu Raccoon seemed to be on a leisurely journey as he laughed softly. Wang Xiu got a daughter at an old age and took in Shenjibao, a closed-door disciple. To be able to get Wang Xiu's daughter to work for you and your endless tricks, even learning Li Chuangang's 2-sleeved green snake so skillfully, I can more or less guess your identity. In Biyao, it's really hard to find a second person like you. You really are Ren Tu's son, Su Fengnian. Perhaps to express his sincerity, Diwu Raccoon didn't even reach out to wipe the blood off. Liang Mang and Li Yang have been spreading rumors about how you're a rotten person on the inside. It must have been hard to hide all these years, right? To be honest, although you and I are already irreconcilable, if I could have met you earlier, I would have rather married to you. The battle at the bottom of the stream opened my eyes. To me, the loss was a grievance, but it wasn't really a grievance. Su Fengnian's tone was flat, the ride was bumpy and you even had a knife in your body. Even if you're the big Xian finger, wouldn't it be better to speak less and suffer less? The burly purple robe said, this bit of suffering is nothing. I rarely ask the same question twice, but I'm really curious about that last knife of yours. Su Fengnian, who had been paying attention to his surroundings, didn't pay attention to this at all. He frowned and asked, you didn't even take the eye of a 6-year-old slave? Are you really going to generously let me leave the southern foot of the Ruran mountain? Diwu Raccoon's face was full of ridicule, his tone colder. Why would I need to play tricks with you? A loss is a loss. Su Fengnian asked, aren't you afraid that once we reach a secluded place, I'll completely end your life? Diwu Raccoon laughed. Su Fengnian, oh Su Fengnian, if you really dare, why don't you give it a try? Su Fengnian laughed along with him. Forget it. It's said that those who don't know the mysteries don't know the mysteries. A top-notch expert like you has all kinds of strange methods. Earlier, when I was certain to die, I naturally dared to risk my life against you. Now that I have a chance to live, I'm not willing to drag the emperor down from his horse. The 5th raccoon clicked its tongue and said, the hereditary king of Biyao, Su Fengnian, how am I going to kill you in the future? Su Fengnian smiled and asked, are you regretting it? The 5th raccoon looked at the rare green and yellow rice fields in Beimang on both sides of the road and said softly, it's more interesting to kill them like that. Don't forget that I'm also the general of Beimang. From the Ruran Mountains to the Biyao border, it's practically a flat stretch of land. Suddenly the 5th raccoon said, I heard that at the end of the Lianggan corridor, close to the western highlands, there is a group of 60,000 barbarians with a complicated composition. They have always refused to be educated, they carry their swords and mount their horses. That year they were all banished by the poisonous warrior Li Shan. Su Fengnian was puzzled and asked, what are you trying to say? The 5th raccoon fell into deep thought. The horses galloped for the whole night without stopping. When the sun rose, they could no longer see the fertile land of the Ruran Mountains. All they could see was desolation. Su Fengnian finally stopped his horse and looked back. The 5th raccoon, who had been resting with his eyes closed, also opened his eyes. Su Fengnian held his spring thunder and dismounted with the 5th raccoon. He asked, shall we part here? The 5th raccoon said indifferently, okay, we part here. Let me ask you a question. It's up to you to answer or not. I'll tell you everything I know. After I pull out my dagger, if I go back on my word and come back to kill you, what are the odds of both of us winning? With your skills, Wang Xiu's daughter's arc spear, and the otherworldly item in the red robe, you have a high chance of killing a heavily injured Xian Ji who doesn't have a cavalry to protect him. Then what about the 3 foreign dignitaries of the army raising mountain who are secretly following you? You know about them? The 5th raccoon, whose secret was exposed, laughed loudly. Even this way, we can part on good terms. Su Fengnian also laughed. Could it be that they wanted to forget their enmity with a smile? With his back facing Su Fengnian, the fifth raccoon's eyes gradually turned red and purple. However, the circulation of his breath did not change at all. The leader of the army raising mountain, who had never suffered such humiliation in his life, had endured it all the way. How could he not give the future king of Biyao a parting gift? He wanted to step into the Xianji realm with one foot and enter the celestial phenomenon realm with the other. Compared to the head of the future king of Biyao, the legacy of the fake realm was not that unacceptable. The three foreign dignitaries who were following him were nothing more than a smokescreen to make everyone look happy on the surface. The fifth raccoon was waiting for the moment when Su Fengnian pulled out his dagger to take a breath. As expected, Su Fengnian slowly pulled out his spring thunder. As soon as the spring thunder left his body, without waiting for Su Fengnian to retrieve the three flying swords, the Taya Morning Dew golden strands took the initiative to explode out of his body. The fifth raccoon's hair was disheveled. He stretched out his arms and laughed loudly. He had a kind of invincible conceit. Even if he was at the fake realm of celestial phenomenon, it was more than enough to deal with the three of them. Su Fengnian said softly, "Longevity lotus, bloom." In the blink of an eye, the fifth raccoon's purple eyes turned golden. Thunder suddenly roared between heaven and earth. Dark clouds covered the sky. The fifth raccoon's chi was turbulent. He was completely out of control. He could only slowly and stiffly turn his head with difficulty. "Give me another incense stick's time." The leader of the army raising mountain could temporarily transcend mortality and become a fake realm of earth immortal. Su Fengnian smiled sinisterly as he walked forward. The spring thunder blade slashed at the fifth raccoon's neck. He slowly cut off the head. The red-robed otherworldly item had already floated behind the fifth raccoon. It bit the neck of the headless man in purple and frantically absorbed his cultivation. Su Fengnian cut off the head. It was a relief. What's the big deal about the fake realm of celestial phenomenon? I'll shrink my big yellow lotus into a longevity seed and implant it in one of your acupuncture points. I'll decide when the flower will bloom. Isn't this directly sending you to the fake realm of earth immortal? Isn't this a great gift? On the Ran mountain, if you were willing to let your profound finger drop to the Vajra realm instead of forcefully entering heavenly phenomenon, choosing the former between a false realm that has both advantages and disadvantages and a drop-in realm that has no benefits, I'm afraid I would have died on the mountain. So what if you're a mysterious finger expert? You think you can come up with a foolproof plan and not suffer any losses? I've already sacrificed 6 years of my lifespan. Even the big yellow lotus is gone. Fifth raccoon, if you don't deserve to die, who should? Su Fengnian muttered to himself. He looked at the head in his hand and then at the floating otherworldly item whose red robe was fluttering in the wind. There was one less mysterious finger expert in the world. There was one more mysterious finger expert. At the same time, Su Fengnian's realm dropped. However, he did not drop from the initial stage of Great Vajra to the second stage. Instead, he fell to the fake mysterious finger realm. Chapter 645. The otherworldly item, which had absorbed Raccoon Diwu's cultivation, suddenly received a great fortune. Its joyful face actually had some spiritual aura. It rolled up its sleeves and its body flew backward. Like a big red bat, the otherworldly item in the red robe flew toward the three foreign dignitaries of Troop Raising Mountain who were hiding in the distance. Su Beiji could only hear extremely tragic tearing sounds and howls of grief. Su Beiji witnessed this inexplicable deathmatch with his own eyes. It was as if he had fallen into the clouds. There were too many problems piled up one after another, making it hard for him to breathe. Su Beiji saw that Su Fengnian was on the verge of collapsing. Blue Bird flew behind him. She didn't support him and only stood back to back. Her body slightly leaned forward so that Su Fengnian wouldn't fall to the ground. Su Beiji's heart was filled with sorrow. Where could he find such a pair of master and servant again? With his back against Blue Bird, Su Fengnian stretched out his hand to wipe away the dirty blood that was as dark as thick ink on his face. He didn't try to circulate his qi to treat his injuries in vain. The big yellow courtyard was no longer there. As the primer for immortality was implanted into Raccoon Diwu's body, it was now empty. Just as he was about to say something, the spring thunder saber in his left hand gently fell to the ground. Before Su Fengnian fainted, he still couldn't tell Bluebird to be careful of that otherworldly item. He didn't know how much time had passed. Su Fengnian was half asleep and half awake. In a trance, he only felt that he was in a small pond filled with lotuses. Unfortunately, they were only withered old lotuses. Otherwise, looking at the purple and golden petals on the lotus leaves and the pond full of blooming lotuses, it would definitely be a pleasant sight. Only then did Su Fengnian remember that it was autumn. He only knew that he was in the lotus pond, but he did not know whether he was sitting cross-legged in the water or floating on top of the pond. It was as if his 7 souls and 6 spirits were like a pond of withered lotuses. Su Fengnian stared aimlessly at the pond. During this period, there was heavy rain of soybeans in the early autumn, wind in the late autumn blowing the lotus leaves, and then heavy snow in the winter. The lotus leaves in the pond were all destroyed. Finally, when spring came, Su Fengnian saw a lotus slowly rising from the empty and lonely pond. There was only a small purple lotus. Although it was only a small flower bone and was far from budding, Su Fengnian was sincerely happy. He remembered the joy of hanging a new peach talisman when he was young. When he first entered Biyao, the Ministry of Revenue and the Imperial Clan Office pushed each other to the side. They were not even willing to spend tens of thousands of taels of silver as a token. Su Shao used his own money to build a large-scale vassal manor on Qingliang. When the vassal manor was completed, the contents of the Spring Festival couplets were written by Li Yishan and then written by Su Fengnian. The couplets that left the deepest impression on him were the 6 words, Jia, Changchun, Qing, and Yu. Su Fengnian stared blankly at the flower bud that was swaying in the breeze, but it refused to bloom. Su Fengnian waited and waited until he had a splitting headache. When he suddenly opened his eyes, there was no longer a small pond and a lone lotus. All he saw was Bluebird's haggard face. Seeing His Royal Highness waking up, Bluebird's eyes that had lost their moisture regained a trace of life. Su Fengnian found himself lying on a hard plank bed with 2 sheets. Bluebird said softly, "Young master, we have already passed through Jintoad province, but Su Beiji said that we could not go straight south, so we took a detour. Now we are on Yanjia Lake that borders Gusai and Longyi provinces." Su Fengnian asked, "How many days have I slept?" Bluebird said mournfully, 6 days and 6 nights. Su Fengnian let out a long breath. His entire body was sore and aching. It was good that he was still in pain. It was a good sign. Fortunately, he did not immediately become a cripple. Su Fengnian sat up. Bluebird helped him put on his outer robe. Su Fengnian walked out of the cabin and stood in the corridor, holding on to the railing. "I know what you are thinking. Are you blaming yourself for causing me to provoke the 5th raccoon? Actually, there is no need for that. It's like a person who has never had a small illness or disaster. If he really gets sick, he probably won't be able to get through it after just one time. It's not as long as those fellows who often get sick all year round. Besides, before I entered Beimang, I had thought of raising my blade all the way until I could finally use it on a finger-profound realm expert. Killing a devil Xiaoling whose realm had dropped wasn't satisfying enough." Bluebird did not say anything. Su Fengnian also knew that he was good at being harsh and sarcastic. Comforting others was really lame. He smiled and said, "Let me tell you a piece of good news. I am now at the finger-profound realm." Bluebird's hand, which had been carefully preparing to support Su Fengnian's frail body, trembled. Once one entered the finger-profound realm, it often meant that one would never be able to comprehend the true profound realm for the rest of their lives. One could fish up the moon with a bamboo basket in the finger-profound realm, but the finger-profound realm was like drawing water with a bamboo basket in the finger-profound realm. Chapter 646. Su Fengnian was too lazy to report only the good news and not the bad news. He said honestly, logically speaking, I have the great yellow court and the favor of the dragon tree monk. I have already entered the path of the great Vajra. Losing the great yellow court is the same as losing the great Vajra. It is more accurate to say that rising in level is falling in level. The disadvantage of false level is that it is extremely difficult to go from false level to true level. But we have to be content with what we have. What's wrong with a fake realm? In any case, it's still a fake realm of the profound realm. Even that awe-inspiring Prime Minister Zhao Danping in the capital hasn't reached this realm yet. If the Great Yellow Court is gone, I think it might be possible to rise again. Rank 1 has 4 levels. Buddhism's Vajra invincibility, Taoism's longevity, Confucianism's resonance of heaven and earth, and then there is the land immortal. For normal martial artists, the 4 levels are ascending in order. There are few freaks who can jump out of the level. The people of the 3 religions are much less restrained and do not like to call themselves demigods. Whether it is a rise in level or a fall in level, I have found a path. Even if it is a wrong path, I want to walk it to the end and see what the end is like. Taking 10,000 steps back, Su Xiao is just a second-grade martial artist who can't be put on the stage. Some time ago, I had an argument with Su Beiji, and neither of us was convinced. In fact, in my heart, I also think that what he said is right. One has to rely on strategy to be the prince of Northern Liang. Since he does not have the ability to go to the 2 palaces and take the heads, there is not much meaning. Su Beiji was standing not far away. He smiled bitterly and said, to be honest, I think you are right. There is no harm in having more skills. Su Fengnian asked, are we going this way? Su Beiji said in a low voice, Yanjia Lake Navy. The general is my grandfather's trusted disciple. I was going to Biyao alone and had to pass through here. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Yanjia Lake Navy. This is the Beimang Empress plan for the south in the future. In the confrontation between the north and south, it has always been about guarding the river, guarding the Huai, and guarding the Jianghu River. 2 of them have to do with the navy. Indeed, we should prepare for a rainy day. Su Beiji's eyes lit up when he heard about the 3rd guard. Unfortunately, Su Fengnian said unhappily, I don't have the energy to talk to you right now. Besides, the 3rd guard strategy was developed by my second sister. If you have any ideas, go argue with her when you get to Biyao. Su Beiji smiled and said, I have long heard that the heir Junju of the Su family has a bellyful of military strategy. Her poetry and literature are even more heroic, without any feminine air. I admire you very much. Su Fengnian joked, let me give you a reminder. If you really meet my eccentric second sister, don't say such things. Be careful that you don't get killed by her sword. Su Beiji accepted his kind intentions and looked at the lake. He sighed and said, my grandfather has always believed that the key to Beimang's future is to see whether Dongzhuo or Hongjingyan is to become the next Tuoba. This time, the sudden death of Raccoon Diwu at your hands has solved Dongzhuo's urgent problem and eliminated his worries. After the battle at Haluku, Dongzhuo was bound to have a rift with Raccoon Diwu. Raccoon Diwu once said that as long as he was alive, Dongzhuo, as his son-in-law, could forget about extending his hands into Mount Tibing and the Ruren Mountains. Now, in order to appease Dongzhuo, who has lost about 7,000 bodyguards, and in addition to the fact that she has always wanted to nurture a capable youth faction in the south, I reckon that the 26,000-strong cavalry from the Ruren 5 towns will all belong to Dongzhuo. Dongzhuo has always lacked heavy cavalry. With the Ruren cavalry, he will be like a tiger that has grown wings. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Su Beiji, if Dongzhuo wants to wrestle with Biyao, I'm afraid it will take a few more years, right? Su Beiji stared and said, a man without foresight is bound to have immediate worries. Su Fengnian smiled and nodded, you're right. Su Beiji felt like he had punched cotton. He felt extremely uncomfortable. He snorted coldly, turned around, and returned to the cabin to continue reading history. Su Fengnian leaned on the railing and saw an old-fashioned golden face staring at him. Su Fengnian extended his hand and knocked on its forehead. He smiled and said, at least you still have some conscience. You didn't burn the bridge after crossing the river, nor did you add insult to injury. The otherworldly item stuck to the wall of the warship grinned. Such a lively and human-like expression gave Su Fengnian a fright. Su Fengnian asked, since you didn't leave, it means that I'm still a decent nourishing ingredient. There's still potential to be discovered? Good, good. By the way, do you really want to go to Biyao with me? The Yuanying of the otherworldly item, who had reached the peak of the arcane finger realm, nodded stiffly. Su Fengnian smiled and said, I've been scheming against Raccoon Diwu. It's called, evil people will be dealt with by evil people. But we're different. We're both straightforward people. Let me tell you something. As long as you escort me back to Biyao, I'll give you the Great Qin Dynasty's green python armor. From now on, you can treat Biyao Palace as your new nest. What do you think? The otherworldly item that had yet to speak seemed to want to use the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva to change its happy appearance. Su Fengnian stopped it and laughed, don't turn around. It's daytime and it's scary. It's fine as long as I know the answer. The four-armed otherworldly item leisurely slid down the hull of the warship. Its vermilion robe disappeared in the lake. Su Fengnian turned around and leaned on the railing. He saw Bluebird's gloomy face. Obviously, she was jealous of the otherworldly item. Su Fengnian almost wanted to laugh out loud. However, he knew that she was shy, so he didn't expose her. He held back his laughter and asked, have you collected Raccoon Diwu's head? Bluebird nodded. Su Fengnian stretched his body. This trip to Beimang was a bit miserable. We were chased from time to time, but we also gained a lot. This warship, which was as large as the Spring God Lake's Yellow Dragon warship, slowly sailed to the southern end of Yanjia Lake. 3 days later, at night, a young man with a head full of white hair stood at the bow of the warship. Su Beiji sighed in the distance. Bluebird was sitting in the cabin. There was a Ksana spear lying on the table. The young master had just turned 20, but his hair was already as white as snow. Although Su Fengnian hadn't looked at himself in the bronze mirror, he knew that he had changed. However, for the past 3 days, his expression was normal and his heart was as calm as still water. His black hair had turned white. This should be the after effects of losing the Great Yellow Courtyard and killing the fake celestial fifth raccoon. It looked a bit strange, but compared to losing 6 years of his lifespan, it didn't hurt at all. He had even joked with Bluebird that he could always get it back. If he couldn't get it back, he wouldn't have to worry about becoming the king of Biyao in the future. His hair was already as white as her ancestors, so how could he not be reliable? If he really couldn't do it, it would be easy to use the best dye to blacken his hair. Su Fengnian quietly looked at the moonlit lake. He believed that after stopping the warship, there wouldn't be too many waves. He could turn all the way to the southern part of the Dragon Waste and return to the Biyao Palace before winter. Su Fengnian said softly, black armor, childhood sweetheart, morning dew, spring water, peach blossoms, moth eyebrows, vermilion bird, yellow tongue, swan-yu, gold thread, tie-e. It was like a general calling out brave soldiers on a general's platform. The 12 sword embryos flew out of his sleeves and hovered in the air. Dong Tai, who was already in the sword celestial realm but was still the most mysterious, would probably be shocked by Su Fengnian's godly speed of sword nurturing. Chapter 647. From the beginning to the end, Su Fengnian did not see the Yanjia Lake Navy commander. After getting off the boat, he sat in a carriage from Jianling Army Town in Longyao Province. Su Fengnian lifted the curtain and saw a strong lieutenant of unknown identity appear at the bow of the boat. Su Beiji, who was in the same carriage as him, looked away along the curtain and said softly, "There's a Yanjia Lake cavalry escort us to Wantong City in the north of Maolong. We will take the road openly." Su Fengnian leaned against the wall of the carriage. On his lap was the spring thunder dagger that could only be unsheathed. Bluebird with Cha Na on her back had already put on her armor and blended into the cavalry. Su Beiji said slowly, "Maolong has become a new frontier in the confrontation between the north and the south of Liangmang. After Dong Zhuo withdrew from the mouth of the gourd, no one was willing to throw their lives away. Only Huang Songpu asked Empress Murong to send an urgent report 800 miles away to lead the troops as reinforcements. Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan, the two great generals, were still observing. Huang Songpu's power was no longer the same as before. Nominally, he was the king of the southern courtyard in charge of 400,000 troops in the southern dynasty. Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan did not need to raise their heads, and even Dongzhua's 60,000 bodyguards were completely unruly. This time, Huang Songpu completely put down his face and used the precious favors he had accumulated over many years to mobilize 90,000 elite cavalry. It was so difficult to be a great general in the southern dynasty. If you did not lead the troops, everyone would be willing to be kind to you and worship you like a bodhisattva. If you really had the military power, they would stab you in the back and hope that you would lose the battle and lose all your capital. This kind of bad habit was brought along by the remnants of the spring and autumn period. In recent years, there has been a saying in the imperial tent that the southerners cannot be generals. If not for Empress Murong's suppression, and Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan did not want the northerners to interfere with the southern affairs, they would have sent secret reports. Finally, they did not drag the southern dynasty down. Otherwise, Huang Songpu would not have had the chance to confront the Biyao cavalry. Su Fengnian saw a scroll in Su Beiji's hand. He took a look and smiled strangely. Su Beiji also smiled and said tirelessly, "A young Taoist from the Taoist mansion of Taoist of Mount Long who made up the scripture of transformation of Laozi, is said Taoist from the Taoist mansion of Taoist master of Taoist mansion in Mount Longhu Mountain." The intention was a trick, but the writing was quite good. Maybe it was Mr. White Lotus, who was given the title by the emperor of the Zhao family, who wrote it himself. Now that the holy monk of the dragon tree has passed away and the monk in white has not said anything, the two Zen temples are in a mess. The group of Taoist Qing Ci in the palace knows how to help each other better than the monks. Plus, the sick tiger Yang Taisui has not shown up for a long time. I think the Beimang's Buddha annihilation is more brutal than your Liang dynasty. Not to mention other things, the fact that there is only one temple left in each province and county is enough to make the famous temples in the same province and county fight among themselves. Su Fengnian said calmly, "Who asked the Buddhist sect not to have the same surname as the emperor of Mount Longhu? Who asked the scholars to flee for their lives during the spring and autumn war? Who asked the Liang dynasty to take control of the overall situation and start to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots? Besides, only in this way can the esoteric Buddhism of the western region see the hope of infiltrating the Central Plains. Only when Prince Zhao Kai crossed the sword garret and entered the plateau with the vase can he retreat unscathed and return with meritorious service. In this way, Beiliang's northern front is suppressed by Beimang, and Gu Jintang's former subordinates are involved in the eastern and southern fronts. Plus, there is the western region, which has been flirting with the imperial court, so we have enemies on all sides. Beiliang has suffered a great loss. Perhaps my master's many foreshadowing will be in vain." Su Beiji did not ask Beiliang about the layout of the retreat. He only smiled and asked, "Is Beiliang a western pure land?" Su Fengnian shook his head softly and said, "This weakness is too big. Su Shao can't openly oppose the imperial court. At most, he will turn a blind eye to the monks who fled into the country. This is already the greatest protection. Besides, a mountain cannot accommodate two tigers. No matter how big the temple in Beiliang is, it can't accommodate two monks chanting scriptures. The Buddhist sect of the western region has completely cut ties with Beiliang. This may be the reason why Zhang Julu pretended to be deaf and mute about the matter of eliminating Buddhism. He did not want to bear the evil reputation, but he wanted to take the benefits. As long as he can make Beiliang uncomfortable, he will do whatever he wants. If you don't ask, I can tell you. The western region and Shuzhou were originally the two dens of the cunning rabbit that my family worked hard to create. Now, one of them will be missing." Su Beiji frowned and said, "Whether that illegitimate son Zhao Kai can succeed is still uncertain." Su Fengnian still shook his head. "I dealt with him during my second journey and almost died at his hands. He is very cunning. With him in charge of the western region, he is like a new vassal king. Beiliang will definitely be unhappy." Su Beiji smiled and said playfully, Beiliang's big yellow sect Jean Lanting. Wasn't it your father who personally promoted him to become an official in the capital? How can he bite back? His death remonstrance may seem trivial, but in my opinion, it is far more ruthless than the old minister's bitter tears. Although he no longer has an official position, he has amazed the people in the imperial court with a single brilliant feat. Everyone in the court praises him, and some people even call him Jin Qingtian. It seems that Zhang Julu also has the intention to cultivate him. The Yan family became a relative of the imperial family, and the Jin family will be next. They will be able to take root in the capital in a few years. You Beiliang people are just a bunch of ingrates, but you all have good endings. Su Fengnian glanced at Su Beiji and sneered. Scholars all want to serve the imperial court. Have you heard of a few old Beiliang soldiers turning around and cursing Su Shao? Su Beiji was speechless. Chapter 648. Su Fengnian bent down and took out a lacquered box from a bag by his feet. It contained a head smeared with lime. Su Beiji silently shifted his butt and hid in a corner, hiding far away. I heard from the old man in the sheepskin fur coat that the divine gate allowed one to become a land immortal. If it was a fake, it would take a long time to climb the divine gate. Fortunately, Old Li did not lie to me. There are only a handful of profound finger experts in the world. There are even fewer profound finger experts like you who have reached the peak. Those who died in such a humiliating manner like you are definitely even rarer. I don't know if I'll ever have the chance to use a strike like that again. I believe that if I were to do it again, I might not be able to use it even if I reached the true profound finger realm. You're really unlucky. Su Shao once said that luck is also a form of strength. It's no wonder that your defeated opponent, Deng Mao, became one of the top 10 while you remained stagnant at the profound finger realm for more than a decade. As he listened to Su Fengnian ramble on with a head, Su Beiji could not take it any longer. With a pale face, he covered his nose and pleaded, "Can you close the box?" Su Fengnian lifted the box and handed it to Su Beiji, scaring Su Beiji so much that he slammed into the wall of the carriage. Su Beiji said angrily, "The dead should be respected. Raccoon Diwu is a long-established senior of the Jianghu. Can you not trample on his head?" The white-haired Su Fengnian put down the box and continued to stare at the head that had died with its eyes wide open as he nagged. Although Mount Bubang has so many Ruran cavalry under its control and is destined to be Beiliang's mortal enemy in the future, the two of us should have minded our own business. I could have taken my maidservant and fled far away while you remained your general and mountain chieftain. Instead, you came to kill me. Who else should I kill if not you? This time, I went to Beimang to practice my saber. Every drop of divine will that I cultivated with great difficulty has been destroyed by your hands. Why don't you come back to life and let me slash you again? Hey, are you a man? If you are a man, then open your eyes and give me a clear answer. At the side, Su Beiji really couldn't stand this bastard Persimmon's nagging. He said angrily, "Can you stop for a while?" Su Fengnian bent down to pick up the box and extended it in front of Su Beiji. "Come, Su Jizi, say goodbye to the fifth raccoon." Su Beiji turned his head and bumped into the wall of the car. He even had the thought of killing someone. Su Fengnian closed the lid, put it back into the cloth bag, and laughed heartily. Su Beiji said angrily, "Is it fun?" Su Fengnian curled his lips and said, "Not fun." Su Beiji lowered his voice and said angrily, "How are you going to inherit the title of King of Beiliang in the future? How are you going to fight with so many strong opponents?" Su Fengnian lay horizontally in the spacious carriage and crossed his legs. He said softly, "I'll take it one step at a time. What else can I do?" Su Beiji wanted to smash this guy called Persimmon to death with the book in his hand. However, he inadvertently saw his white hair and silently stopped. Su Fengnian sat up and lifted the curtain. He waved at Blue Bird, who was wearing armor and holding a spear. When Blue Bird came closer with mixed feelings, Su Fengnian's face was fierce and angry. "If it wasn't for the fact that young master felt that you were beautiful, had a good figure, knew how to manage the household, and had outstanding martial arts skills, I really couldn't find a better girl or a more considerate maid than you. Otherwise, I would have abandoned you and run away in the Ruran Mountains." When you return to Biyao, work hard to practice the 4-word formula. In the future, when you kill a few finger-profound realm experts, don't forget to say that you're this young master's maid before you kill someone. Remember. Bluebird nodded lightly and smiled sweetly. The carriage returned to silence. Su Beiji read a few pages of scriptures that slandered Buddha. He couldn't help but raise his head and ask, "Is this how you treat all your servants?" Su Fengnian asked back, "Are you a master?" Su Beiji smiled and said, "I'm just a refugee. Of course I'm not a master. But you are." After Su Fengnian lay down, he looked at the ceiling and said softly, "That's why you'll never understand how Biyao's 300,000-strong cavalry got to where they are today." No longer paying attention to Su Beiji, Su Fengnian finished humming that vulgar song for mountain patrol. Then he started humming a nameless song. What's a hero? Chopping off his head to make a urinal. What's a hero? Does he know a unique skill like the monkey picking peaches? What's a hero? When you're penniless, can you conjure up a big flatbread? Su Beiji, spoiled the mood, interrupted and asked, "Can I ask you something?" Su Fengnian stopped humming and nodded. Su Beiji asked curiously, "Do you still have the strength of a first pin?" Su Fengnian chuckled. "That's hard to say. As for me, I have a Saber manual. Originally, I learned it step by step. After learning a move, I turned the page one by one. A while ago, I accidentally skipped to the last page. It's obviously a Saber manual. The last page is called Lingxi, but it talks about the realm of the sword. What a coincidence. I have 12 flying swords on me. As long as they're not at the mysterious finger realm, I can kill one if one comes within 10 feet of me. If 100 come, I can still kill 100. Su Beiji said calmly, "Amazing." Su Fengnian turned his head and asked in puzzlement, "Are you praising me or belittling me?" Su Beiji lowered his head to read the book. When he suddenly looked up, Su Fengnian had picked up the box again and displayed the gray head in front of him. The elegant and mellow Su Beiji couldn't care less about scholarly elegance. He gripped the book tightly and smacked the bastard. Su Fengnian smiled and retreated. He put away the box and the cloth bag. After lying down, he folded his hands and used them as a pillow. "Su Jizi, what do you think of the new nickname I gave you?" Su Beiji rewarded him with one word. Scram. Su Fengnian turned to the side and rummaged through the cloth bag. Su Beiji quickly sat up straight and nodded seriously. "This nickname is very good." Su Fengnian gave him a thumbs up and praised him. "You know the big picture and know when to advance and when to retreat. You're a first-rate strategist. Su Jizi, in the future, Biyao will be the face. I have high hopes for you." Chapter 649. Originally, Su Beiji thought that after approaching the Maolong region, he would have to spend a little more effort before he could sneak into the south. However, very quickly, Su Beiji realized that the situation was beyond his expectations. Tens of thousands of refugees began to crazily flow along the two sides of the post house. Among them, there was no lack of luxurious carriages. According to the laws of Beimang, there were a few post house routes that did not allow soldiers or horses to set foot on. Thus, even though they were fleeing in panic, there were no tyrannical families that dared to set foot on the post house. Fortunately, the flow of people was huge. 2 flat paths had already been created on both sides of the post house. Carriages and horses could pass through without hindrance, only moving slowly. The post house routes of Beimang were interwoven like a net. The carriage that Su Beiji was in went against the flow. Behind him, there was an endless stream of cavalry that galloped from other post house routes to the south. Su Beiji ordered an Arrow Ridge cavalry officer to inquire about the situation. Only then did he receive an answer that made him even more flabbergasted. Even though Huang Songpu had personally led 90,000 elite cavalry to confront the Biyao army, a group of Biyao cavalry still directly slaughtered their way through the hastily set-up defensive line and headed straight for the capital of the south. Looking at their unstoppable sharpness, it seemed like they wanted to treat the 3 great generals as nothing and the 2 provincial decrees as decorations. They wanted to wipe out all the civil and military officials of the south. Historically, it had only been the northern cavalry going south that had this kind of boldness. Since this cavalry army whose numbers had yet to be determined were all white horses and white armor, it was naturally the Great Snow Dragon cavalry without a doubt. Their movement made Huang Songpu's already not that tight defensive line even more loosen. The great king of the southern courtyard, who had always held righteousness in high esteem, speculated that this was the work of Yin Chi, who besieged the city to attack reinforcements during the Battle of Huluku. Together with the great number of military towns behind him, none of them were soft persimmons that could be crushed under their feet. He only transferred out 20,000 light cavalry to chase after them, even strictly ordering them not to take the initiative to attack, placing more of his attention on building the defensive line and keeping a close eye on the remaining Biyao cavalry. Moreover, for the first time, he used his status as the great king of the southern courtyard, a status that many of the influential figures of the southern dynasty didn't treat too seriously, to give Gu Serong and the other two provinces two sets of military orders that left no room for leeway. The common people of the southern dynasty couldn't care less about whether or not the general's plans were flawless, whether or not they had a card up their sleeves, or whether or not they would completely wipe out the Biyao barbarians after the battle. They only heard that as long as those barbarians' horse hooves entered the city, they would massacre the entire city until it was empty. They also heard that even sharp weapons like the Biyao sabers were continuously chopped until creases appeared on the heads of the barbarians. The 10,000 Long Xiang army was already this ferocious, so the 10,000 men of tile building in Gentleman's Pavilion were simply not enough to fill the gaps between the barbarians' teeth, let alone Su Rentu's 30,000 personal troops. If by any chance Su Yanwang personally came to Beimang, would the common people be able to drown Su Rentu to death with their saliva? Who the hell swore to us that as long as the Beimang armored cavalry was willing to go south and fight, they would be able to fill that Gomliang River with the corpses of the Beiyang's 300,000 armored soldiers, piling them up into a gigantic capital like never before? Which son of a bitch dares to deceive us in front of our faces again? I'm going to punch him until he's looking for his teeth on the ground. Su Beiji lifted the curtain and smiled as he introduced to Su Fengnian a group of cavalry troops with exceptionally solemn expressions outside the window. These are the troops from Huangxian town. The general leading them is surnamed Gu and his name is Luo. He's the son-in-law of the Longyao province's provincial magistrate. He's usually very arrogant and doesn't like anyone. It looks like he's really scared of you guys. The expression on his face is similar to that of someone who's ready to die. In the past few years, whenever the Biyao army was mentioned, they would look askance and pout. Su Fengnian said flatly, "Foolish arrogance." Su Beiji laughed out loud and said, "Are you talking about me?" Su Fengnian frowned and said, "When you're in Biyao, don't always talk about how your Biyao is like. Biyao has always been xenophobic. The military and the officialdom are similar. Let's not talk about the pros and cons of this kind of stubborn habit. In short, you have to take it easy." Su Beiji nodded and said, "I have my own plans." Su Fengnian muttered to himself, "Don't tell me they're really going to fight all the way to the imperial court of the South Dynasty? They must have eaten tens of thousands of pounds of bear's heart and leopard's guts. Who's the one leading the troops? It's not like Yuan's Wazong style." Su Beiji hesitated and said slowly, "Don't you find that Biyao is a bit like the fields at the foot of the Ruan mountain that we saw?" Su Fengnian asked, "There's a shortage of young people and old people?" Su Beiji said slowly, "The king of Biyao has 6 foster sons. Needless to say, Chen Zhibao can be given the title of king anywhere. With his talent, he can even start his own army. Yuan's Wazong is worthy of being called a talented general. It's not difficult for him to take charge alone. He can easily destroy a city with tens of thousands of elite troops. However, it's hard to say if he can command the overall situation. Qi Danghua is just a brute who charges into battle and carries the royal flag of Su. Yi Shizhen is good at scheming. He is called the next young talent Xiao Chengling. In the end, he is still a strategist behind the scenes who needs to rely on others. Yao Jian is a feng shui master who is familiar with unorthodox methods. He has always stood aloof from worldly affairs. As for Chu Lushan," Su Fengnian smiled and said, among Su Zhao's 6 adopted sons, if you really want to talk about who can barely stand shoulder to shoulder with Chen Jibao, it's only him. He is a true all-rounder. As long as it's something he knows, he's proficient in it. My master is not famous because of Zhao Chengling. Chu Qiu, and Chen Jibao are in similar situations. Su Beiji continued, Wei Fu, Qingdian, Xiong Shou, Ningame, these young and strong high-ranking military officers, compared to Chen Jibao, the gap is very big, much less those who are biased toward you, the heir apparent, are pitifully few. Therefore, other than Chen Jibao and Chu Lushan, Bailiang cannot find a third outstanding general who can stand up to Dong Zhuo alone. Su Fengnian smiled but did not speak. Su Beiji asked, Is there someone else hiding? Su Fengnian laughed and said, Have you forgotten my second sister? Su Beiji said doubtfully, You also know that talking on paper and personally leading troops are two different things. Su Fengnian's expression changed dramatically. He clenched his fists because he knew who was leading the great snow dragon cavalry to Nanjing. Su Beiji immediately guessed the truth. He said bitterly, If she can return to Bailiang alive, I will be convinced. Su Fengnian exhaled deeply. His brows relaxed. He closed his eyes and leaned against the wall of the carriage. He said with a smile, Then you can be convinced now. My second sister had memorized all of Beimang's military towns, villages, and post stations before the age of 14. Su Beiji thought carefully in his heart and then shook his head hard. After a long time, he asked, Why? Su Fengnian rubbed his face and said softly, When she was young, she made a bet with my eldest sister. Second sister said that she would lead troops to Nanjing before the age of 30. Their bets are a book on the art of war and a box of rouge. Su Beiji snorted coldly, How can military matters be trifled with? The rout of the Longxiang army was clearly calculated by a military expert. Using losses to gain momentum can be seen as buying time for you. What is your second sister? Su Fengnian teased, If you have the guts, the next time you see her, ask her yourself. I don't dare anyway. Su Beiji was stunned. You even dared to go to Ruoshui and kill the 5th raccoon, but you don't dare to see your second sister? Su Fengnian sighed. He had a headache. When he was practicing the knife, he didn't talk to her when he saw her. This time, he went in a big circle in Beimang. Wouldn't she chase after him with a sword? The cavalry went deep into the hinterland like a butcher dismembering an ox. They bypassed many military towns and tore a perfect curve in Beimang's territory at the fastest speed. Their speed was fast, their strength was great, and their goal was clear. They all exceeded the limits of everyone's imagination in Beimang. The cavalry at the front didn't wear a helmet. In the young woman's field of vision, the majestic silhouette of Beimang's largest city already appeared. The eyes of the 9,000 light cavalry behind her were filled with crazed and burning worship. They never knew that war could be fought like this. It was like a big man strolling about in his own home. When he encountered a disobedient child who didn't have the strength to retaliate, he would fiercely smack him with a chestnut. Every time they came into contact, it was just like she said, where and when they would cross swords with many troops. It was because they bypassed all of the tough bones. With the great snow dragon cavalry's military strength, dealing with them was as easy as blowing off dust. Could it be that she was the mistress of Southern dynasty? Going up north was a piece of cake, but going down south would be a tough battle. However, this daddy has even seen Nanjing Manor's city gate, so why would I be scared of you bunch of grandsons? The woman's appearance couldn't be considered a country-toppling beauty, but she was heroic and extraordinary. Her temperament didn't have the slightest bit of charm or delicateness mixed in. After she got off the horse, she fished out a yellowed book from her bosom. She ignited the flames and burned it to ashes. She raised her head towards the sky. Her lips moved slightly, and then she silently mounted her horse. Chapter 650. The heavy snow in Bailiang's winter over the years had always been heavy, unlike in the south. This made the children, who had recently settled down in this barren and desolate land, very happy. The amount of iron ore, war horses, and food in Bailiang was not something they could touch. Among the 4 children, the eldest daughter wasn't particularly outstanding. She was just like any other young girl who liked to use rouge and face powder. It was just that she had a feisty temperament, just like when she swung on the swing. She wasn't as reserved as the other young ladies of noble families, always wishing that she could swing higher than the top floor. The second child was the most intelligent. Since childhood, he had been regarded as a child prodigy. He learned to read very quickly and was introverted. Everyone said that he took after his mother. The third child looked the most like his beautiful mother. He was a typical lucky man from the north and a prime minister from the south. He was destined to be a noble since he was born. Perhaps this family's descendants had used up all their luck on the first 3 children, so the 4th child, who was born and raised in Biyao, was a little pitiful. Just like the land in his hometown, he had never cried since he came out of his mother's womb. After he could walk, he was simple and naive. He was yellow and skinny, and there were often 2 lines of snot hanging from his nose, mixed with saliva. The servants in the mansion also thought that the mistress died because of him. In private, they liked the first 3 young masters from the bottom of their hearts. Only the 4th child, who was extraordinarily strong, disliked him. Some brave young servants would fiercely bully him when there was no one around. Anyway, the little boy was like copper tendons and iron bones, so he was not afraid of being pinched. Even if he was slapped a few times, it would not be a big deal as long as he was not seen by the housekeepers and gatekeepers. The 12-year-old Su Weisheng's study was spotless and orderly. There were no superfluous decorations, except for the 4 treasures of the study and the vast number of books that included the 100 schools of thought. Every book on the bookshelf was meticulously circled with a red pen. Today, she was writing the character, Yong, meticulously. As the second commandery princess of Biyao Palace, she was known to be good at everything except calligraphy. This made Su Weisheng, who was always eager to outdo others, go to a dead end and swear to write a satisfactory regular script. It was okay if he couldn't beat his brother, but how could he lose to her? She had long been familiar with the true meaning of calligraphy. She didn't need others to teach her how to write. She knew very well how to write with a straight brush and a side brush to the point of perfection. However, when it came to her to write, it was always twisted like an earthworm. This made Su Weisheng, who had written more than 3,000 characters this autumn, a little annoyed. A handsome boy with red lips and white teeth carried a corpse that was smaller than him into the study. Su Weisheng raised the corner of his eyes slightly and ignored him. The luxuriously dressed child put down the corpse and laughed. "Huang Manor, we're here." The corpse, lying on the ground, immediately stood up after hearing the voice. He grinned foolishly, with 2 snot drooling and a lot of saliva hanging from his nose. This pair of brothers was Su Fengnian and Su Longxiang. Huang Manor liked to be dragged by his brother. He also liked to be thrown into the snow by his brother on a snowy day. His whole head was cold and very comfortable. Su Fengnian reached out and carefully wiped his brother's snot and saliva. Then he wiped it on his cuffs carelessly. He pointed to a wind-weather seismograph with a dragon head facing a toad in the study. He patted Huang Manor's head and said with a smile, "Go and play with the toad. Remember not to break it this time. If second sister chases you away, I won't help you." The yellow child obediently squatted beside the big bottle. This time, he didn't secretly pull up the toad that was squatting on the ground to catch the bronze ball. Su Fengnian lay on the desk and shouted, "Second sister, you're still practicing calligraphy. What are you practicing for? Let's go fishing by the lake. Big sister has already set up the embroidery stool." Su Weisheng, who was already a young girl, didn't even look at her brother Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian scratched his head and said helplessly, "You really don't want to go?" Su Weisheng said impatiently, "Write another 60 Yong characters. I still want to study." Su Fengnian, who was used to it, said, "Oh," and laughed. He grabbed the brush and spread out a large piece of paper. He scribbled a few dozen Yong characters in one breath before returning the brush to his second sister. "Look, you've already finished writing. Let's go play together." Su Weisheng glared angrily. The little heir of Biyao Palace whistled and didn't care at all. Su Weisheng put down the brush and said coldly, just half an hour. Su Fengnian smiled and said, okay. The three siblings walked out of the study together. Huang Man was naturally dragged out by his brother. Su Fengnian asked, second sister, when is it going to snow? Su Weisheng frowned and said, the frost has just started. It's not even the beginning of winter yet. Besides, it might snow a few days after the light snow this year. Su Fengnian made a face and said, second sister, you're so smart. Why don't you just let the heavens snow earlier? Su Weisheng reached out and pinched the little heir's ear hard. This year, Biyang's first snow really did come 3 days after the light snow. The two young ladies and the two younger brothers were having a snowball fight. Su Fengnian had to persuade his second sister to come out of the study and play with her. Of course, he and his second sister were on one side, while his eldest sister, Su Jihu, and his younger brother, Huang Man, were on the other side. Because the terrifyingly strong Huang Man had told her brother that he was only allowed to make snowballs and not throw them. In addition, under the command of his second sister, Su Weisheng, Su Fengnian played in a very methodical manner. The isolated and helpless Su Jihu was naturally smashed many times. However, after surrendering, she secretly stuffed a snowball into Su Fengnian's collar and was satisfied. Su Fengnian grimaced and took out a snowball from his clothes as he said to his second sister, how about we go to Tide Listening Pavilion to enjoy the scenery? Su Weisheng refused without hesitation, no, I want to study. Su Jihu helped her brother take out a snowball and said with a smile, it's enough for a girl to marry a good husband. You've read so many military books. Don't tell me you still want to be a general. Su Weisheng glanced at this older sister who had been an enemy since they were young. She couldn't be bothered to speak and turned to leave. Su Jihu made a face at her younger sister's back. Su Weisheng seemed to have eyes on the back of her head. She paused and turned her head to say coldly, how many more years do you think Su Fengnian will be able to play? Su Jihu furrowed her beautiful brows. She put her hands on her hips and asked, how do you know? Su Fengnian sensed that something was amiss and knew that they would be implicated if they stayed any longer. He pulled Huang Man and hurriedly left the battlefield. Afterwards, he found out that his two sisters had made a bet. That year, the snow in Biyao was exceptionally heavy. The young heir almost thought that the heavens were an old farmer who raised geese. Otherwise, why would there be so much goose feather snow? Su Fengnian was led by a man in a black robe into the military town of Maolong in a carriage. The taciturn man was the coachman himself. Maolong, who was patrolling the city, saw the man's token and stood still solemnly. The general's token. Biyao was huge, and there were 300,000 cavalrymen, but there were only 9 tokens in total. The 6 adopted sons of the general each had 1 token. The other 3 tokens were in the hands of someone else. Su Fengnian recognized the general's token and the coachman's identity. He only had 1 title, ugly. He was one of Su Zhao's men of sacrifice from Earth Branch. In the Battle of the Concubine's Tomb, Yuan Zuozong was not the only one who survived. This man of sacrifice also survived. The number of people he killed was not much less than White Bear Yuan Zuozong. Su Fengnian did not reveal his identity as the heir and went to the general's mansion in Maolong. He just chose a secluded inn to stay in. The innkeeper had already fled for his life. However, with Blue Bird by his side, Su Fengnian did not have to do anything. Everything was comfortable. Su Fengnian said that he would stay here for a few more days. Ugly naturally had no objection. When this cold-hearted man of sacrifice first saw His Royal Highness, he also had a fleeting moment of absent-mindedness. When he wrote the 4 words in the secret letter, his hand trembled slightly. The heir's hair turned white. After waiting for 3 days, Su Fengnian left the city and went south. The carriage had not yet arrived at Gujuan town. Waves of iron hooves shook the earth. No less than 5,000 white horses rushed over like a line of snow. Su Fengnian walked out of the carriage with a wry smile and met the cavalry behind him. The first horse galloped and then slowed down. The woman rode the horse to a dozen steps away from Su Fengnian and looked down at him coldly. She originally had too many words of reprimand hidden in her mind, to the extent where she even wanted to give him a few horse whips, and then tie him up and bring him to northern Liang. However, when she saw the exceptionally unfamiliar scene in front of her, the lips of this heroic woman who could enter northern Mang as if there was no one around her trembled, unable to utter a single word. Su Fengnian wanted to say something but stopped. She raised the whip and pointed at Su Fengnian. She said angrily, "Su Fengnian, if you have the ability, die in Beimang." She turned the horse around and galloped out. After she turned her back to the white-haired man, her vision blurred. She covered her heart with one hand. Su Fengnian stood in the same place. He looked up at the sky and reached out to block the dazzling sunlight. The snow cavalry came in a hurry and left in a hurry. Su Fengnian was about to return to the carriage when a barefoot youth in black clothes fell from the sky with a loud crash, creating a huge crater. Su Beiji, who had walked out of the carriage and stood beside the horse, opened his mouth wide. The black-clothed youth originally had a silly smile on his face, but when he looked at his older brother, he suddenly burst into tears. Then, he let out a roar towards the north. Su Beiji covered his ears but couldn't bear it. The two horses even bled from their 7 orifices and died on the spot. If Su Beiji didn't have the ugly death warrior holding his arm, he wouldn't have ended up any better. Only Su Fengnian, who no longer had De Huangting by his side, did not suffer at all. The youth in black crouched down and carried his older brother, who he thought was seriously injured. He wanted to carry him back home. Su Fengnian patted Huang Manor's head and said with a smile, "I'm fine. You go and stop second sister. Don't let her lead the troops north." Huang Manor shook his head vigorously. The world was big, but it was not as important as him protecting his older brother on his back. Su Fengnian said patiently, "Be good. The 3 of us will go home together." Just as Huang Manor carefully put down Su Fengnian, a horse returned.